My world moves virtually at the speed of light, spinning spirally in space towards a future that's full of promises, full of dreams. I choose to be real with my dreams. I choose to find myself in a place where my dreams are beautifully shaped and nurtured. A haven of true knowledge and light. A place where I learn to live my life.
Situated next to the Philippine seat of power, with campuses in the country's major hubs of business and commerce. Culture and history. Centro Escolar University is the place where the highest forms of human thought, talent, and creativity blend together for a unique learning experience.
The Escolarian education is anchored on the university's twin philosophy, Ciencia y Virtud, science and virtue, the pursuit of knowledge guided by the highest ideals of humanity. The Escolarian education produces graduates who are empowered by timely knowledge and skills and inspired by timeless virtues to contribute to human and societal development.
This is where my dreams are set in motion and begin to turn into reality. The ultimate place of an unforgettably exciting and life-changing education. CEU is my choice, my future, my move.
ng magiliw, pelos ng silanganan, alam ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, duyan ka ng magiting, sa manlulupin, di ka pasisingin, sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong baghaw. Kalilat ang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal, ang islat ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagniningning, ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may di magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng walhati pagsinta, buhay ay langit sa piling mo. Ang hindi kaya ng pagkay mga api, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
The University Convocation 2021. Please welcome our host, Professor Edward Dipari.
Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat, Escolarians. Happy viewing to all. Today is going to be a fruitful and insightful Saturday as we expect a scholarly yet conversational exchange of ideas on how social media impacts human behavior and society as a whole. Hindi naman lingid sa ating kaalaman ang malaking epekto ng social media sa ating buhay, lalong-lalo na ngayong pandemya. The way we communicate, our social and political behavior, the democratic institutions, all of these have in one way or the other have been affected by emergence of social media in the last decade. Kaya naman samahan niyo kami ngayong hapon sa isa na namang makabuluhang talakayan sa pangunguna ng Presidential Committee on Culture and the Arts ng Centro Escolar University. Before anything else, I would like to remind everyone who's watching on Facebook and YouTube channels of CEU to type in your questions and comments on the comment box so I can ask the speakers later. And of course, don't forget to register. The link is provided on the comment box. So let's start. To lead a big university like CEU is really a Herculean task, especially now that we are in a pandemic. And on the front line is a remarkable and transformational leader who is going to give her opening remarks this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, may I call on the Millennial President and our Chief Frontliner, Dr. Maria Cristina D. Padulina. Hi, ma'am. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone and greetings of peace and joy. Welcome to the annual Centro Escolar University Convocation. Traditionally, a convocation in colleges and universities is an act of calling an assembly of the academic community. Through this annual event, CEU brings the community together to learn and reflect upon a theme that bears upon the university philosophy, Ciencia y Virtud. This year's convocation touches on a social theme that pervades our society and impinges on each one's well-being. We would like to thank our two speakers, Professor Richard Havdarian, I hope I said that right, Professor, of the Technological University of the Philippines, and Dr. Jeyeel Cornello of the Ateneo de Manila University, who have come to shed light to our community on how social media is impacting not just our day-to-day lives, but our self-concept and identity, and the way we relate to one another, and even our mental health. In the Statista website, we read that, quote, the Philippines has one of the highest numbers of social network users across Southeast Asia, with a social media penetration rate of approximately 67% as of January 2020. And that has probably gone up in the past year. On average, Filipinos spend almost 4 hours daily using social media. This may actually have been increased in the past year. We also read that despite threats of hacking and the dangers posed by cybercrime, the popularity of social networking sites show no sign of slowing down, as most Filipinos stated that it was unlikely for them to use less of social media. Given the reality that in the current circumstance of our world, with physical contact being severely limited, most of our waking hours are spent in the digital world, and our socializations are done mostly through social media. We need to be informed about the good and the bad of social media use. As an educational institution, we need to learn how we can influence our students to put social media to their good advantage. We need to be informed about the science of media psychology and how it impacts on the evolvement and maturation of the values of our students, that we may be able to influence the same. We wish to thank the CEU Presidential Committee on Culture and the Arts, headed by Vice President for Student Affairs, Dr. Carlito Olaer, and the head of the CEU Conservatory of Music, Professor Angelito Ayran Jr., for organizing again our university convocation. We continue to be amazed at their agile transition in staging programs and concerts from in-person events to the virtual mode. With the activities that the PCCA holds through the year, they have enriched and enlivened our university life. Thank you to the very active members of the committee, Mr. Marciano Viri, Mr. Fredelin Parin, Mr. Herman de Guzman, Mr. Lester Delgado, Mr. Noel Aguilar, Dr. Maria Corazon Andoy, Ms. Leyan Marie Viola, Dr. Lani Sakay, and Mr. Ricky Rosales. And of course, thank you to our favorite MC in our virtual programs, Mr. Edu Repari. Through this convocation, let us learn how to use social media to positively influence our behavior, our interaction with each other, the way we get news and information, and as a university, improve our service as an educational institution. Mabuhay ang Centro Escolar, ang mga Escolarians, mabuhay ang ating bayan.
Thank you so much, Madam President, Dr. Padulina. Tama po kayo. Tayo po ang social media capital of the world. Sabi po yan ng ating sabi po yan ng We Are Social, ang Social Creative Agency. Sabi po nila, social media capital of the world daw po tayo. Spending an average of 9 hours and 45 minutes per day online. 2020 po ito yung data na ito. So talagang napaka-importante po ng ating responsibilidad para mas maging maingat tayo sa pagpo-post sa social media. Okay? And now, para mas lalo nating madama yung ating pagka-Filipino, hahandugan tayo ngayon ng isang interpretative dance number ng CEU Folk Dance Troupe sa saliw ng musikang Ako ay Pilipino. Thank you so much, CEU Folk Dance Troupe. At sana maramdaman po natin ang ating pagka-Pilipino sa musikang ito na inhandog sa atin ng CEU FDT. At pinasasalamatan din natin ang kanilang direktor na si Mr. Marciano Viri. And now, let's get started. I am very honored to introduce our first speaker. I am very fortunate to have worked with this principled scholar and academician on GMA Network Incorporated. He is a popular face on your television screens, giving valuable insights on different societal and political issues in and out of the country. Professor Richard Havdarian is an Asia-based academic and policy advisor. He is a professorial chair holder in geopolitics at the Polytechnic University of the Philippines, or PUP, and has delivered lectures at the world's leading universities, including Harvard University, Stanford University, Columbia University, and Beijing Universities, and previously was a visiting fellow at National Chengchi University in Taiwan. And he is currently the assistant professor in political science at the De La Salle University in Taft, Manila. As a columnist, he has written for the world's leading publications, including the New York Times, Washington Post, The Guardian, Foreign Affairs, and is a regular contributor to Al Jazeera English, Nikkei Asian Review, South China Morning Post, and the Straits Times. He has written extensively on Philippine politics, populism, and Asian affairs. His latest books are The Rise of Duterte, A Populist Revolt Against Elite Democracy, The Indo-Pacific, Trump, China, and New Global Struggle for Mastery. And among his latest academic works are Penal Populism in Emerging Markets and The Ascent of Asian Strongmen, Emerging Market Populism, and the Revolt Against Liberal Globalization. He has also written Philippine Politics from Rizal to Duterte, Subaltern Populism, Dutertismo and the War on Constitutional Democracy. He is also a regular contributor to leading global think tanks such as Center for Strategic and International Studies, Brookings Institution, and Council on Foreign Relations. His forthcoming book, ladies and gentlemen, which is the basis for his professorial lectures, is China's New Empire from Melbourne University Press. And ladies and gentlemen, Professor Richard J. Havdarian.
Salamat po,
Prof.
salamat po. Thank you very much, Edu, for that
Afternoon.
kind introduction. Narinig niyo ba ako? Am I clear? Sorry.
Yes.
I think I only used this app once, no? So, just when we thought we figured out Zoom, mukhang may bago tayong kailangan i-figure out. So I hope I can go through this smoothly and also with my sharing of my presentation today. Thanks again, Edu, and thanks to folks at CU for this kind of invitation. Throughout the years, CU has been very kind to invite me to different events. I think the first time was a co-speaker with then Senator Bongbong Marcos. And then, of course, just before the pandemic, keynote speaker for one of the graduation ceremonies you had. Thank you very much for that. And now, of course, it's nice to be back as we head towards next year's elections. Now, Edu asked me to talk about national leadership, national politics, social media. I have to double check again his Facebook message to me. So that's practically, I don't know, like a whole semester of lectures. So I don't know how I'm going to compress that. So probably I'll just try to go through certain themes in the next 25 to 30 minutes and then leave the discussions for question and answer, yung further discussions. So I'll try to cover as much as I can. But I thought first I'll try to start with the issue of social media and disinformation, because this is, I think, a very important issue for us, especially as we head towards the elections. And the concept of sharp power. Again, this presentation is not to cast a specific country or people in a negative light, but this is based on objective analysis of certain trends and certain areas of interest for political scientists. It's also partly based on my visiting scholarship to Taiwan in 2019, when I was able to study some of these important issues that I'm going to discuss today, which is, again, the issue of sharp power. So let me try to share my PowerPoint. I hope this works out. Okay, I think this is how it's going to work. So as you can see, there's like two PowerPoints here. Is this the screen now? Okay, yeah. Okay, this is all right. First of all, let me just do it this way. Yeah, let me discuss first sharp power, the concept of sharp power, the role of China, disinformation, and future of democracy. Again, this is not to cast negative light on a specific country. We're just trying to be objective about it and potential threats to our democracy. As besieged as it is, things can get quite worse for the country in next year's elections. Now, speaking of the Philippines, we do have a problem. It seems misperception is a big problem in our country. So when countries were measured in terms of the level of confidence they have in certain, knowledge about certain issues, and then how accurate those were, it seems the Philippines ended up as one of the most, underinformed, let's just say, countries. I don't know what's the PC language for that. Countries whereby it seems there's a high level of confidence about our knowledge about certain issues, and yet the level of actual factuality of our knowledge and correction and correctness of that, it seems, is very problematic. So it seems there is a problem with public information in our country. So I think just next to Brazil and South Africa, we are one of the countries where we need to do something about this gap between people's level of confidence in terms of their knowledge on public issues and actually the accurateness of that level of knowledge. And I would argue that the fact that disinformation is a big problem in the Philippines has been a very major contributor to that. Yes, we are the social media capital of the world, but as I warned in 2016 in an interview with the New York Times, which I think is still being quoted here and there, the Philippines was also a ground zero for kind of a fake news operations around the world. And we see over the years that more and more reports are coming out that it seems even some of our call center operations are doing double time, right? So some of them are working at call centers sometimes, and sometimes as troll farms, right? So this is a problem. Now, personally, I've had very colorful relationship with the disinformation queens and kings in this country. This is especially after back in 2019, I made a protest kind of column about the lack of proper response by the president on the Reed Bank incident. And shortly after, some interested folks, some in one government agency, tried to portray me as illegally driving my car. And of course, that turned out like a big joke. And I had to respond to a subpoena. I had no less than certain person calling me the fake news king of the country, although she's more known as the fake news queen. I had some of the YouTube bloggers of certain side trying to portray me and Maria Ressa and Lenny Robredo as kind of people who want to be exempted from law. So this is something it's personally very close to me. Someone who has been at the receiving end of a lot of this misinformation. So it's quite personal, but I don't take it personally. So it's just that it seems I have more ground, perhaps, field information about how these things work. Now, the reality is that we are living increasingly in a post-truth, or let's just call it post-objective fact age. Now, I saw one very interesting analysis about the roots of this, and it seems one good explanation for that is what happened in 9/11. It seems a lot of the trends that we see online in terms of disinformation campaigns, in terms of people's lack of confidence in mainstream media, in the academe, in the experts, in traditional politicians, a lot of that had to do with what happened in the 9/11. Because when the 9/11 happened, the September 11 happened, well, a lot of you are quite young, perhaps you don't remember it, or you were not even born during that time. But this is when the two towers, the World Trade Center, were actually struck down by Al Qaeda group, and the fact that happened and it was not prevented, a lot of conspiracy theories came into surface about that. As you may know, there were like conspiracy theories that this was an inside job, and then the fact that later on the Bush administration kind of used that as a pretext to invade not only Afghanistan, but also invade Iraq based on what we can call today fake news, which is the allegations that Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons, which turned out to be totally fake news, right? Those circumstances, the 9/11 and what happened afterwards, and some of the uncertainties, like how did the Bush administration even allow that to happen? Why not only one, but two airplanes were able to strike down two of the most iconic towers on Earth? So a lot of conspiracy theory came out during that time. But a lot of these conspiracy theories also gained a lot of traction because a lot of information that was coming out of the government was either being proven not credible or being proven as patently wrong or false, right? So the Bush administration kind of contributed to the kind of traction that these conspiracy theories gained, and from there you have a whole host of permutation in the fake news industry that has today morphed into bizarre things, among others, the so-called QAnon phenomenon. So I suggest you guys to read about this, but it's almost it's a cult that is almost like a religion in the United States. So there was a survey, I think, by Pew, which showed that close to 20%, I think, of Americans had a certain degree of affinity or appreciation for the so-called QAnon conspiracy theory. And if you bother to research about it, essentially the QAnon conspiracy theory says that, all the Democrats are like pedophiles and there's some global conspiracy to control America, and that Donald Trump is supposed to be the savior of the country. Some bizarre stuff. So I really suggest you folks to research on that yourself. But so there seems to be an arc extending from the circumstances around and after the 9/11 attacks all the way to today with this massive fake news phenomenon. And the rise of fake news actually has also coincided with the rise of new forms of populism. Now, populism is not monolithic. Just like COVID-19 virus, it can mutate. And just like viruses and pandemic, they can mutate into becoming more deadly or less deadly and endemic over time. So you can have less vicious forms of populism, but also more aggressive forms of populism. But the kind of populism we got from 2016 onwards, Brexit, the victory of the populists here in this country, victory of Donald Trump, it seems to kind of track also with the phenomenon of fake news entering mainstream, and also this growing lack of confidence among ordinary individuals in anything mainstream media, mainstream experts, mainstream traditional politicians. So that's why populists were able to present themselves as different, as agents of honesty and change, and people who will push for supposedly real change. So those are the circumstances we're looking at. Now, these are the problems that have been gripping democracies around the world. So countries as developed and advanced as the United States, to fledgling democracies like the Philippines, Brazil, and India, populism and fake news seems to be a serious problem for all of us, right? Now, that also makes this democracy very vulnerable to manipulation from outside, especially from authoritarian superpowers who might want to manipulate certain weaknesses within democracy. So, as you may know, the accusation is that Russia, for instance, played a very important role in pushing for disinformation campaign during the US elections in 2016 and also more recently in 2020 elections. Now, there are also accusations that other authoritarian superpowers like China may be involved, but not in the case of US. It seems the information that we're getting is that the suggestion is that China did not have a preferred candidate in the last year's elections. But the fact of the matter is that there are concerns that these authoritarian superpowers may have an interest still in influencing the direction of politics, especially elections in democratic countries that are of high interest to them. Whether they want these countries to be more friendly to them, whether they want to disrupt democracy in these countries, or even more sinister, it depends what context we're talking about. Now, generally, the two kinds of powers that we're familiar with is so-called hard power. So hard power is your military power, it's coercive power, and so-called soft power, which is persuasive or attractive power. For instance, the power of Hollywood of the United States. It has huge influence on how we view the Americans and how we view the world through the American eyes. That's the soft power. Now, if you look at aircraft carriers, you look at fighter jets and tanks, you're talking about hard power. Now, but nowadays, there's a discussion among political scientists about so-called sharp power. So this is an approach to international affairs that typically involves efforts at censorship or the use of manipulation to sap the integrity of independent institutions, whether this is media, whether this is elections, whether this is a university, whether this is the office of presidency. And of course, the approach takes advantage of the asymmetry between free and unfree system, allowing authoritarian regimes both to limit free expression and to distort political environments in democracies. So this is the new term that a lot of experts are using, the phenomenon of sharp power operation. So again, as I said, Russia, for instance, has been accused of spreading disinformation in American and European elections, among others. And guess what? Things are being done. So I know in the Philippines, we keep on saying, well, we have a freedom of expression. True, but we also have a legislation against libel, right? So just because we have freedom of expression doesn't mean that you can just go there and spread false information about someone else, denigrate their persona, their reputation, and essentially get away with it as if nothing happened. So in short, there are legal actually stipulations in our constitution and among many democracies against certain forms of abuse of freedom of expression. So freedom of expression is not absolute. My freedom to express myself in a democracy should not come at the expense of deliberately denigrating someone else and harming someone else, right? Especially when you're using false information in a systematic way to distort the image of someone or to distort conversation about a specific public issue on which you have specific interest, right? So that's something we have to keep in mind. For instance, let me just give you examples. In Europe, for instance, in certain European countries, you cannot deny Holocaust. If you deny Holocaust, that 6 million Jews were killed during Second World War, you can face actually legal punishment. If I'm not mistaken, in France, there are also legislations against denial of other genocides, including the Armenian genocide around 100 years ago. So even in the most mature democracies, there's a limit to how much you can use your freedom of expression. Because if you abuse your freedom of expression, right, to incite violence, to denigrate someone with a very malicious intent and in ways that will really damage the person, then there are actually legal stipulations against that. So never the concept of freedom of expression should be seen as absolute in ways that could be deliberately abused to undermine not only a person's integrity or a person's well-being, but also the health of an entire democracy. So if public discourse is a form of well, kung saan kinukuha natin yung tubig natin, disinformation is like poisoning that well, which will affect the entire community, right? So something has to be done against that. Now, we have many democracies who are doing something about it. So Australia, for instance, in recent years has taken a tougher stance against foreign interference and foreign financing. So they have noticed that certain countries or certain individuals associated with certain countries have been trying to push for certain political agenda in Australia, have been trying to manipulate or influence democratic institutions in Australia, whether on issues like South China Sea, whether on investment restrictions on a foreign country. And accordingly, Australia actually has passed foreign interference laws. Now, this was, of course, in this case, more targeted against China or people who are acting in behalf of China. Again, when we say China, we're not talking about people of China or people of Chinese descent. We're talking about specific policy of the regime in Zhongnanhai in Beijing, right? Now, in other countries like Taiwan, where I was based, there were also more serious concerns. So a few years ago, there was this so-called, candidate, a resurgent candidate, Mayor Han, who came from Kaohsiung. And this guy was not very known. And then out of nowhere, suddenly he has huge following online. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, this guy was suddenly becoming a top contender for presidency. And guess what? One of the things he kept on saying is that Taiwan should have a good relationship with China. So he was very pro-Beijing in terms of his position. Well, kind of sounds familiar, right? But anyways, so there was some research analytics about where did his following come from, all these hearts and likes that this guy is getting. And actually, what experts found out that is that a lot of that was actually bots or fake kind of campaigns. And a lot of that was traced back actually to elements within the government of the PRC in China. As you may know, China does not recognize Taiwan as a separate entity. So obviously they had an interest in pushing for someone who has a more pro-Beijing line, especially because Taiwan has had a much more pro-independence president under Tsai Ing-wen. So actually in previous midterm elections, not the latest elections in 2020, but in 2018 elections, if I'm not mistaken, a lot of pro-China elements were able to win in the Taiwan elections. And the accusation by a lot of experts is that based on the studies they have conducted, a lot of these elements were actually acting in behalf of a foreign country, right? And a lot of their campaigns was actually aided by elements outside Taiwan, right? And Taiwan actually had to also pass new legislations like Australia against foreign financing and foreign interference threats, and also do specific things for the cybersecurity elements of their elections to make sure the integrity of the elections is kept intact. Now, in other countries in Southeast Asia, like Singapore, there are also growing concerns that, for instance, China is trying to push for this line that any person of Chinese descent is supposed to be ultimately loyal to Mother China, and that's Beijing, not necessarily. So that has caused a lot of problem, especially in countries like Singapore, which is Chinese majority, but of course Singaporean Chinese see themselves as Singaporean, not Chinese of mainland China, right? And one of the persons who raised a lot of issues about that is former foreign secretary, permanent secretary of Singapore, and leading experts Kosikan Bilahari. So I really suggest you read stuff by this guy, columns he has written on the issue of foreign meddling. So this is a very serious issue. And accordingly, Singapore passed specific legislations against fake news. Now, we may have some debate about Singapore because unlike Taiwan and Australia, Singapore is not a liberal democracy. So there have been accusations that Singapore may be trying to also use this to also restrict freedom of expression in an undemocratic way. But the fact of the matter is that Chinese majority Singapore, Taiwan, and even other liberal Western-style democracies like Australia have been doing something about this. They have noticed that they have vulnerabilities in the systems, and accordingly, they have been trying to protect their democracies or the integrity of their political system from manipulation from the outside, especially from a specific country that has been mentioned here. Now, in the case of the Philippines, we are not so much talking about this. It seems the conversation over the past 4 or 5 years is what Maria Ressa and others have been talking about, which is this issue of troll farms and so-called patriotic trolling. So anyone who disagrees with those who are in power nowadays, it seems they are denigrated as so-called Dilawan, as agents of the US, as not really real Filipinos, and so on and so forth, right? And this kind of phenomenon has been also observed in Turkey under populist President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, in India under Narendra Modi. So it seems this is a problem that is existing in a lot of places. Now, more troublingly, in recent years, we see reports suggesting that, again, the Philippines actually is becoming global capital for troll farms, including what experts call white trolling. So there's a dark trolling, which is, you systematically try to denigrate someone by spreading fake news. But white trolling is more like propaganda, like, trying to make certain politician or certain country look good. And there are studies that suggest that the Philippines actually, right, is becoming kind of like the fake news or troll farm capital of the world, right? Cambridge Analytica, among others, were also very much, operating in the Philippines. So again, I really suggest you to check some of these studies that have been mentioned, because the problem is not only not unique to the Philippines, but it seems the Philippines may have a uniquely bigger problem than a lot of countries on these issues. Now, of course, some people are saying that there must be perhaps a reason why certain personalities here wanted to go to Russia. Maybe they're getting training there, but I don't want to get into that. But what really troubled me is during an interview I had with Mr. Jimenez, the erstwhile spokesman of the COMELEC, I asked him expressly, and you can find this on YouTube and online, this interview. I said, does the Philippines have any legislation against foreign interference and foreign financing? Apparently none. Zero whatsoever. So even if things are happening in our country, it seems we have nothing against it. Now, there were efforts to deal with this issue. For instance, Senator Gracewell tried to push for a certain bill to look at potential regulation of, information dissemination, but she was accused as trying to, be dictatorial and kind of limit free speech per se, legitimate democratic free speech. So in her effort to discuss fake news, she was attacked by fake news suggesting she's dictatorial or against freedom of speech per se. So this is the problem we have. When certain politicians or legislators want to do something about it, they themselves can be a target of this fake news campaign, because obviously they'll be the losers if ever there is any crackdown on disinformation. Now, more recently, we see as we head towards the next elections, certain senators and legislators are finally coming out. They're suing some of these big tech companies for not regulating a lot of disinformation that is being spread. Some of them very personal, especially in the case of Senator Pangilinan, among others. And then we know that, for instance, a certain quote-unquote troll in Baguio, my hometown, was actually arrested, it seems, a few months ago. So finally something is being done about this, but nowhere near and nowhere as early as it should have. Nonetheless, this is going to be a very serious issue as we head to next year's elections. Again, these are things that you can research on your own. So Facebook also last year detected China-based accounts backing certain person or certain team and tandem in next year's elections. And these are things that we have discussed also earlier. So in short, this is not just an imagination. There are some serious concerns about how we already have a disinformation problem. We already have troll farms in our country, but we're also very vulnerable to foreign powers manipulating our democracies and further spreading disinformation. So these are some of the serious concerns that we have. Edu, how much time do I have? How much time? Gaano katagal yung discussion ko?
10 minutes. Yeah, 10 minutes. 10 more minutes.
Okay. Did you guys see my presentation at all?
Yes, we did.
Oh, yeah, okay. I have 10 minutes more. Okay, let me try to end on a slightly different note because this is what I really want to discuss. Ayoko tong issue ng fake news and disinformation because I don't know, medyo mahirap siya. It's very complicated issue and I don't want to come off here as if I'm pushing for regulation of speech, right? But I'm saying, hindi po absolute yan. But it's a very complicated. But let me end on a much more exciting, inspiring point of view because as we head towards elections, again, we're not endorsing anyone. But what I'm saying is this, within the next 5 minutes, let me discuss this, no? Kasalanan mo yan, Edu, kasi you asked me to discuss all these issues. But let me be very quick about this. Now, yes, we have this information issue, but the other problem we also have is that we perhaps also have the wrong idea of what kind of leaders we need, especially in the 21st century. So even if you may be very well informed or not disinformed for that matter, if you have a wrong idea of what kind of leaders are good for a country, then you might still end up not making the best choices in the next elections and as a citizens, right? So that's why I think it's very important for us, sorry, I'm a little bit hyper about this, is to discuss for the 21st century what kind of leadership we need. Now, my argument is that in the 21st century, you need leaders who believe in and enable strong institutions rather than strong men, precisely because we live in a century of extreme complexity. This is not the 20th or 19th century, or even earlier, especially, when one king, right, could make decisions about how much grain of rice we make in the country. Pwede siya magchismis anong ginagawa ng sa kabilang castle. We live in countries with 100 million people, with 200 million people. We're in a globalized world of 7, 8, 9 billion people. We are in the middle of pandemic that has many layers to it. So in short, having kind of a tatay figure, right, who's supposed to know everything, that may have worked in the past, but in the 21st century, what you need is data-driven public policy and institutionally strong countries who can deal with complicated problems. So this is the problem with us in the Philippines. We still subscribe to this 18th century idea of the great man of history. So if you have a great leader, it's just magically, because my political will yung taong yan, everything will be resolved, right? Except if you bother to read, for instance, Tolstoy in his great book, War and Peace, he would really nicely argue that, for instance, Napoleon, the supposed great man of history, would not have been Napoleon had he not been born into France and millions of French joining the Grand Armée, right? So it is really the greatness of the French Republic and the Republican Revolution in France that gave Napoleon the conditions for him to even exercise his talent as a general. But some would have even said that even an idiot in charge of the Grand Army of France perhaps would have done well, right? In fact, as Napoleon himself said, right, in war, what you need is just to make fewer mistakes than your enemy, right? So our tendency in the Philippines is that we have this 18th century idea that if you put some great man or great woman on top, automatically and everything will be solved. Now, let me give you some extreme example, because I suppose you have been following developments in Afghanistan. Now, if you bother to check Afghanistan, before this happened, right, these guys ended up on top and this happened. Actually, Afghanistan was led by very interesting people. So some of their young generals were Western educated generals who were very charismatic and well-trained and articulate. In fact, this guy, Sami Sadat, you can check his op-ed on New York Times. While he was in the mountains fighting against Taliban, he got to write apparently an op-ed, very well written, why Afghanistan collapsed. And in fact, if you bother to check on the background of the president of Afghanistan, Ashraf Ghani, this guy was voted the second most influential global thinker in 2013, and a former professor at Johns Hopkins University in the US, and a top expert on state building in Afghanistan. Ironically, though, it seems this person had a lot of information and looked very impressive in terms of their CV, as did the Afghan military. But the reality is that, this is the reality, Afghan people suffered because no one really actually focused on developing strong institutions in Afghanistan. And what do we mean by strong institutions? You see, a good government is like a good movie script, right? A bad movie script is like, meron ka lang isang hero and everyone else is like props. So once namatay yung hero na yan, tapos na yung kwento, no? Like the whole story collapses. But a good story, a really good story, and that also applies to a good government. It's like, for instance, Game of Thrones, right? If you look at Game of Thrones, suddenly who you think is the hero dies, but there's so many level 2, level 3 heroes with very beautiful, complex stories, right? That's why very engaging yung Game of Thrones, right? For some of you have managed, who have bothered to watch it. So governance is similar. If you only rely on one person, and that one person happens to be a fraud, who in elections look very competent, but in reality very inutile, or this person actually was very competent at first, then he got sick and he got old and he became corrupt because, as they say, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So the tendency is that in history, right, when you put all your eggs in one basket, which is in some great leader or some fake great leader, once that person goes wrong, everything collapses. But when, just like a nice movie, you have leadership develop on multiple levels, cabinet level, assistant secretary, heads of agencies, also in the civil society leadership, heads of labor union. When you have strong institutions which rely on good leaders, right, on multiple levels, then those societies tend to be more successful and more effective in dealing with crisis. So I'll try to just end on this point. There's so much to discuss, but I just wanted to open up your minds, or hopefully not close your minds. I mean, if you look at the most successful countries in the past 2 years in dealing with the pandemic, these are the countries that actually fulfilled 3 important things. Yes, they had good leaders. There was stewardship, leaders who appreciated evidence-based policy making. Hindi haka-haka lang, hindi lang sila nagbibiro, no? They don't make questionable deals on masks and everything like that, or defend corrupt people all the time. But these were leaders who were focused on dealing with the pandemic in the best way possible, right? These were also societies that actually had very strong state institutions that had the capacity, had the autonomy. People in the government were put there. Hindi naging assistant secretary yung isa dahil maraki yung following niya as a blogger or supposed blogger, but because naging assistant secretary siya because may competency siya in a specific department. This is the case in communist Vietnam. This is also the case in a non-communist democratic Taiwan. And this is also the case in Western-style liberal democracy like New Zealand. So if you look at all successful cases in dealing with the pandemic, in terms of economic recovery, in terms of numbers of, making sure that infection doesn't get out of control, you look at all of these successful cases, they have all these 3 elements going together. They had competent leaders, not strong men, strong women, but competent leaders who work within the framework of strong institutions and further enable those institutions because their state institutions are based on merit, no? Hindi based on sino kilala mo, right? Or kung sino-sino lang na political appointee. And at the same time, they also had social cohesion because when you have competent leaders and when you have effective state institutions that can provide you services and protect you in moments of crisis, people have trust in the government and also trust among others. And clearly you can see the problems in our country is that on all 3 levels, we have had serious problems. Right? So what I'm telling you is that the pandemic should have been a wake-up call for all of us, especially for those who say that, if you just put one great guy on the top or supposedly great guy, everything will be rosy. It's more complicated than that. In the 21st century, we're going to have more pandemics, climate change problem, technological disruption, globalization going crazy. So we have to deal with those issues. And the only way we can deal with those issues competently, effectively, and in a sustained way is if we don't just rely on one so-called great man, but actually rely on numbers of leaders on multiple levels who strengthen our institutions, create trust among our citizens, and trust in citizens in the institutions of government. That's how we build a strong Philippines. And these are the kinds of leaders, the leaders who push for strong institutions and trust and confidence in our government, in our democracy. Those are the leaders that we have to vote for. I hope I kind of changed the tone to make it more interesting. Thank you very much. I'll keep it there and looking forward to the question and answer. Maraming salamat.
Okay, now we go to the question and answer portion. Okay. Kanina dun sa presentation mo, I saw a GMA News headline that says that the Philippines is lagging behind in terms of critical thinking and reading comprehension. Tama? Now, how do you think should the government address this? Kasi importante ito, lalo na ngayon sa mga social media netizens natin ngayon, importante ito for them to be responsible in using social media. Kasi the more that you are critical thinker and the more that you are a comprehensive reader, malalaman mo na fake news agad ito eh. So how do you think should the government address this, Richard?
Well, I mean, we have to address this on multiple sides, no? I mean, syempre yung ating gobyerno has to come up with something. Perhaps we can learn lessons from Australia, from Taiwan, other more democratic countries than us who are passing specific legislations, as I said, vis-a-vis sharp power, influence operations, but also domestically in dealing with fake news, no? This is a serious issue. You're poisoning the well of democracy. Kasi kung puro na lang fake, kasi ang hirap kalabanan ang fake news eh. Because fake news is a deliberate, systematic way of essentially poisoning the well of democracy, right? And how do you do that? Salacious, yung headline grabbing, clickbaitish, right? To the next level. So it's hard for facts to compete with that because facts are quote unquote boring, right? Facts are boring. You have to research and all. Research kayo dyan,
So academic, very academic dapat.
So for instance, there was a study by MIT that showed that fake news tends to at least travel 6 times faster, meaning being shared 6 times faster. So if you do it exponentially, walang laban ng facts, no? So it's a little bit hard, like to people, kunyari, war on drugs, di ba? Yung fake news is that, eto mga zombie na to, atakin tayo. The only solution is barilin natin lahat. Like, I mean, that seems very instinctive and easy. Now, if you come in and say, well, that didn't work in Colombia, this is how it worked in Portugal, and then you give a 5-page explanation, how are you going to compete with that? Malaking problema yan. So there's already disadvantage for sanity, right? And facts. One way to deal with that is, of course, to make facts more interesting too. So hindi tayo boring, right? People in the media, in the academe, we have to be more engaging. Siguro mag-YouTube tayo. I mean, I started that. Medyo siguro more TikTok, whatever. But at the end of the day, the state also has to do its part. Number 2, as educators and in the media, of course, we have to instill critical thinking. Ano po ibig sabihin ng critical thinking? Hindi po ibig sabihin ng critical thinking na mag-criticize ka ng criticize.
Yes,
in fact,
yes.
just criticizing mindlessly is a form of not thinking critically, right? Critically means you can process many information and yet come up with a distilled and reasonable and fact-based conclusion, right? Na hindi ka lang mag-absorb lang kung ano, or kung ano lang nega, doon ka lang, di ba? Or you don't fall for false binaries. For instance, yung whataboutism. So whenever you criticize the government, they say, what about si ganito? Or what about si ganito? Like, so if you're not a critical thinker, you're just say, well, all are bad anyway, so everything is okay, right? So that's lack of critical thinking. Critical thinking is that, yes, may mali yung isa, yes, mali yung B, mali yung A, mali yung C. Pero grabe, criminal level yung level C, medyo incompetence yung level A, yung level B, medyo sa gitna, right? So critical thinking is about weighing, right? And not just falling for, lahat naman ng politician corrupt. Well, there is corruption in the system, but not all politicians are the same, right? There are levels there. And levels matter because at a certain level, it's already criminal or beyond the pale. At certain level, it's a little bit tolerable, and at certain level, it's completely understandable, right? So critical thinking is about doing that, processing different contradictory information and coming up with reasonable judgment. Now, we should do that as educators by encouraging our students to think on their own. So in the classes, hindi ako nagsuspoon fit. So I give you the theoretical framework, which is like kind of parang yung kung gagawa ka ng fruit, yan ang but it allows you to just juice it out. But the process should be done by you, right? So we gave you the skeletal framework structure, right, to have a reasonable and kind of a coherent view of the world. But bahala ka na how you research the information and process the information. The other one is, my goodness, like a lot of people, for instance, cannot distinguish between a fake website and a real website. So napansin ko, during in the Philippines, one big problem, and this is where the big telecom companies should also be involved. So meron tayong free Facebook, diba, for a while, no? And the problem for free Facebook is that if you want to do fake news lang, madali lang naman eh. Lagay mo lang kunyari, bbc.com, but kunyari may .t or something like that, na obvious na fake, if you know, right? Now, there are people who do the next level, no? Na just in case mag-click ka, may makikita ka pa rin BBC, no? Or something like that. So I think it's important for people to be able to distinguish between what is fake or what is not. I mean, I don't want to use the example of driving, but siguro naman bago ka nag-drive, you have to know the basics of driving, right? Somehow in the internet, bago ka pumasok sa internet, you have to have certain basic grasp of ano talaga yung bogusly bogus, right? And what is right. So hindi yung mga YouTube University type, no? Like whatever you see on YouTube is not necessarily correct. In fact, algorithms to make money, right? They push you towards craziest idea, yung rabbit hole na tinatawag, no? So just because you see it on YouTube doesn't mean it's correct, right? And the problem also online is ang dami mga conspiracy theories. And the problem with conspiracy theories, you cannot disprove them, right? Because kaya nga, hindi nila sasabihin sa yan, kaya wag kang maniwala. I mean, like, that's the problem. So it appeals to some side of us which is skeptical and cynical and all. So critical thinking is not to be cynical. It's to be reasonably skeptical because you want to wait for more information. You want to process it. You want to look at different sides of a certain argument before you arrive at the judgment. It's not about being an expert. It's just about being a reasonably well-informed a citizen who can make right judgments about their life, whether wearing masks, getting vaccines, voting in elections, etc., etc. So I think the responsibilities on the part of the government, it's on the part of us as educators, it's on the part of the media. Yes, media has to make money. I understand they're a corporation, but wag naman saning super clickbait-ish na ang baba ng, di ba, yung parang nag-dumb down yung issue. Dapat watered down, simplified, but not dumbed down, right? So there are problems, obviously, with our educational system, right? Nakikita natin naman sa mga rankings, no? Like, I'll just be very honest about that. Had I not studied in certain university, I wouldn't have even known much about our martial law and all of the things that happen, right? I mean, let's just be honest. Our basic education doesn't say much about what happened in 50 years ago, 40 years ago, right? So it's you'll just get to know that pag nasa college ka na. So that's quite disappointing, right? So there's some serious problems with also our basic education. So hindi lang kulelat ang Pilipinas based dun sa mga rankings ng PISA nakita natin sa math, sciences, and English literature, but also in terms of basic history and processing of facts. So critical thinking should start at a very young level when you allow the children to think for themselves, right? By showing them what is bogus, what is not, and what should be up to them. So trabaho din natin bilang mga educators is not to tell people what to think, but just to teach them how to think. So as Jesus, said, right? It's not giving the fish, but teaching them how to catch the fish, right? So it's the same thing. That's what critical thinking is about. And sometimes just criticize ka lang ng criticize. That's cynicism. That's not healthy skepticism, and you can be just as mindless and reckless and irresponsible. And just to give you an example, like I see that there's a time check point there. I mean, I see people like, di ba may mga report na kunyari itong media mali. So automatically everything from media is mali, and everything that criticizes the media and social media is right. So yung ganyan na logic, that means wala kang critical thinking. Because pwede mali yung mainstream media or yung professor mo, but that doesn't mean you go fall for someone who's totally fake, right? And this is what's unfortunately is happening to a lot of people. So if you're a critical thinker, you take everything with a grain of salt and you wait for information and you process it. So yun ang kailangan natin sa democracy. So this is our job in the civil society but also in the level of government.
Ayun, nabanggit mo kanina yung sa critical thinking dapat may level yan na dapat kung ito magaling, ito hindi, tapos yung isa medyo hindi magaling. Ngayong darating na eleksyon, dapat ba na lagi na lang nating piliin yung lesser evil? Mm-hmm. Kasi kung si A, kunyari we have three presidential candidates. Yung isa medyo corrupt, yung isa mas corrupt, yung isa pinaka-corrupt. Lagi na lang ba tayong mag-choose dun sa lesser evil? Kapag ikaw yung botante, yun ba yung pipiliin mo yung lesser evil or i-abstain ko na lang, di na lang ako di na lang ako boboto or parang ganun. Kasi importante din yun kasi sinabi mo kanina about critical thinking, reasonable dapat yung yung pag-iisip mo.
Yeah, I say it's Lester saying I only got 1 minute or so. The thing is first of all, walang perfectong tao, and that even more applies to politics, right? So don't look for some ideal leader. I mean, my thing is this, parang if you want to introduce Tesla, which is like the best electric car probably, at least I've seen it in person, that's my experience. If you introduce Tesla to a context whereby wala naman silang charging stations or matinong roads, no? Wala kwenta yung Tesla, no? So first of all, you have to understand that in certain contexts, siguro kung idea mo is Barack Obama is a great leader, that may not necessarily work in a different context, right? So first of all, yung leadership mo ay dapat someone who can work with the system that we have and it's palatable to the electorate we already have. So I'm not saying bring down your standards. I'm just saying adjust your standards. The next thing I want to say is that no candidates will be perfect, but that doesn't mean necessarily ang usapan lang dito is lesser evil. I'm sure there are a whole range of candidates with pros and cons, and we have to discuss that. And just because a candidate comes from a known family doesn't mean trapo ka agad. Or just because the person is not trapo doesn't mean na competent agad, right? So don't fall for lazy thinking and cliches, right? Really research the background of these people. And I'll tell you what, as a politician, dapat magaling ka talaga mag-project, right? It's like beauty pageant. A leader is not only having brains, but also having emotional quotient, emotional intelligence, right? EQ is very important. So their leaders are napakatalino, pero wala naman masyadong mahina sila when it comes to reaching out to the people. Walang audience impact. So you might want to go with someone who may not be the super smartest, maybe just good enough, and then someone is also just good enough in terms. You know what I'm saying? Like if you just go for perfect, you fall for very bad. But if you have some basic standard and anyone who goes beyond that for you, okay, then I think you can come up actually with better choices. So I'd rather go with someone who may not be Tesla, but kind of a Prius, medyo hybrid, but actually can work in our system, right? So you can guess what I'm suggesting here, right? So I think the moment we drop this kind of unrealistic ideas, oh, what we need is like that, or tingin mo lang isang dimension, ay matalino lang siya, but you don't look naman competent ba siya? Can he really make people work? Magaan bang loob ng tao? May audience impact siya? Kasi you need all of those. Kung wala kang audience impact, kahit matalino ka, you can't be an effective leader because leadership is emotional at the end of the day. So someone na medyo konti siguro tamang pag-isip, pero someone who can also relate. So these are the things that you have to look for in our next leader. And not only presidents, as I said, even if matino yung presidente mo, kung hindi naman yung mga sumusunod na levels, yung mga governors, congressmen, mayors, magkakaproblema ka rin. And in the same way, if you even get a bad president, kung competent yung mayor mo, competent yung congressman mo, if they do their job, then we can also damage control. Right? So we have to look at leadership on all levels, not just the presidency. At ito yung problema natin. Tinitignan lang natin yung presidente. Kung maganda, may pag-asa. Kung pangit, walang pag-asa. But we're not looking at the whole system. So just like a movie, don't look just at the script of the star. If it's actually a good movie, you have to look at the script of the secondary, tertiary stars. And that's what will hold the nice script all together. And I think the same thing should apply also to governance.
Correct. Ito, Richard, may isang question tayo from a student. Sabi niya, I was also able to read that research that says fake news seems to spread faster than factual news. My question po, sir, is how do we make factual news more appealing to the general population or general public? Yan yung tanong ni John.
Yeah, I mean, yes, thanks, John, for that question. I mean, my thing is, again, there has to be some legislation. Something has to be done. There should be pressure on Facebook and these big tech companies to be a little bit more responsible. Alam mo, kumikita sila, pero sana naman, diba? Not to a point na destroying the whole system and all. But what I can also say is that it's also the job of educators, public educators, media, to make facts more interesting. And how do you do that? Narrative, stories, make it inspiring, right? So, I mean,
that's
for instance,
what we did. Diba?
Yeah. So, kanina, like, okay, I didn't have time. Pero, but you get what I'm saying? Like, for instance, you can talk about leadership, but not in so bullet point way. Like, give some interesting stories. Right? About background of certain leaders, the hardships they went through. When I think you give a narrative, especially an inspiring narrative, and still based on facts, that's how you win audience. Let's not forget, lumabas po tayo sa dark ages. I mean, not long ago, all of us were slaves and peasants, right? Paano tayo umabot dito? Because we're lucky enough that in the past, there were leaders who inspired us to abolish slavery, like Abraham Lincoln, for instance, right? There were people like Gandhi, right, who pushed for spiritual resistance against tyranny and colonialism. There were people like Martin Luther King Jr., right, who excited people. They said, I have a dream whereby African Americans and colored people will be more respected and treated. So, see, they talk truth and facts, right? So you can have a truthful, factual, and inspiring narrative, and that way you can get people. So I think, not naman I'm blaming us, but I think to a certain degree, nakakulang din tayo. If we just resort to jargons, kung tayo lang nag-usap or nagdi-depress na lang tayo, wala tayong magawa, talagang mananalo itong mga trolls. Paano mo naman talunin itong mga trolls na to? How can you compete with that? Diba? I mean, I don't have to give you examples, but how on earth? But if at least we have to try to make facts more interesting and nest it in a bigger narrative of national rejuvenation. So I think if we try harder in the media. I mean, that's the little thing I try to do in my own way, no? I mean, write a little bit more excitedly, and go back to our history. Rizal and all of these people, marami silang, diba? They also had a lot of problems, but even under all those circumstances of limitations, they were still able to push for something. So it's not just information that matters or facts, but narratives that tie and weave all in this information together to push the country forward. Because at the end of the day, lahat tayo human being, we need stories in our mind. We have stories that process information. Information we're not robots. So we need the stories to tie them together. So if you give people a nice story based on facts, weave them together, we have a better chance fighting against fake news, which, by the way, is also a narrative. It's a counter narrative. It's an alternative universe narrative, right? And yun nga yung naging problema natin in the past few years. Certain forms, not all populism is bad, but certain forms of populism won because the counter narrative was not there. So in Brexit, there was no narrative why Britain should stay in Europe. There was no exciting narrative. So people easily fell for all of this, kung hindi tayo mag-Brexit, tapos ng England, blah, blah, blah. So they voted against it. So I think that is what we have to do. And in the Philippines, we need a narrative to make people excited about democracy and to show them kung wala kang demokrasya, well, punta ka North Korea or China, let's see kung ma-enjoy mo yan, no? Because not necessarily will be a Singapore if we lose our democracy. Most likely will be more like the other ones, right? Or what we had in the past. So narrative ang medyo kulang sa atin. And I think we need good storytelling. Good storytelling but based on facts or inspired by facts. At doon ko nakikita. That's why you can have very well-informed stuff on YouTube that get millions of views and they're actually very well done. So hindi totoo na lahat ng mga nag-viral are necessarily stuff that are, just fake news or salacious. I mean, I've had some blah, 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 just comments, factual. I made it a little bit exciting. Next thing I know, laking share, no? So even from my own little humble experience, napansin ko is there's also an onus on us to give a more interesting narrative. So data-driven public policy, but also the leaders should also give a narrative to the people why we need this policy. So we need good storytellers. Hindi yung istorya, pero yung good storytellers based on public policy that is fact-driven. That is the leader we need. Not the smartest guy on the planet, not just a kwento-kwento guy, but someone who can have both a certain degree of intellectual competence and certain degree of storytelling capacity. That's the kind of leader I'm going to vote for in the next year elections.
Yes, thank you so much, Professor Richard. That was a very meaningful discussion. Totoo po yun, yung narrative. Kailangan natin ng narrative sa pagkukwento. Dapat engaging, dapat hindi lang ito yung visually appealing, dapat factual din. Actually, diyan kami nagkatrabaho ni Professor Richard sa paggawa ng mga data-driven pero engaging na narratives kagaya ng China-Philippine relationship, yung mga ganun na boring talaga. Tama siya. Facts are boring. 'Di ba? Factual reporting is boring pero kailangan gawin na social media-ish yung kanyang atake kasi sinong manonood, 'di ba? Kaya ayun, maganda yung tanong mo diyan sino nga yung nagtanong si John ata.
John Ben. Yeah. Just the last thing. I mean, there's a very nice quote, Edu, that really stuck with me from Socrates. He said, "You have to seduce people into truth, right? So people will not just fall for the truth just like that, because truth could be hard, truth could be complicated, truth could be disheartening, right, or confusing. So your job as a philosopher for Socrates or any educator or a politician or leader is to seduce people into truth and the right direction forward by giving them an inspiring story, but based on facts, right? And I think this is what we can learn from the prophetic tradition, from the great leaders in our history who pushed forward the frontiers of civilization. So in that sense, wag tayo mag-depress na walang pag-asa, because we have been in worse situation and got out of it, right? So I think there's definitely a solution here, and we have to talk about solutions, just not the problems. That's why maraming salamat dito sa discussion natin. No?
Yes. Ayun, thank you so much, Professor Richard. Napakaganda ng discussion natin. And I hope yung mga nanonood sa atin sa YouTube at saka sa Facebook, maraming salamat at marami tayong natutunan ngayong hapon na ito. And may isa pa tayong speaker na papakinggan mamaya at napakagaling din ng speaker natin na susunod. So, thank you so much, Sir Richard. Congratulatory messages are on our comment box. Ayan, maraming salamat sa iyo. At factual narrative stories. Ayan, tama. Dapat daw gawing Filipino daw yung script, wag daw English kasi yung iba hindi masyadong marunong sa English siguro, hindi naiintindihan. So, the language is very important also. Thank you, Prof. That was very enlightening, nakakagalak, nakatuklas ng ganitong impormasyon. Ayan, no group, no sector of the society has the monopoly of the truth and the law. That's why let's respect each other's conviction, according to Professor Julius De Leon. Ayan, thank you so much, Professor Richard. Okay? So, ang susunod nating bahagi ay pahandugan tayo ng isang napakagandang musika mula naman sa The CU Singers Manila. Okay, so yan ay sa awiting Tagumpay Nating Lahat. Panoorin po natin.
Ako'y anak ng lupang hinirang, kung saan matatagpuan
ang hiyas ng perlas ng silangan, nagniningning sa buong kapuluan.
Tanay ko ang hiwaga ng silangan, at saan mang bayan o lungsod,
Maging timog, hilaga at kanluran, ang Pilipino ay namumukod. Sama-sama nating abutin, binagkamay tayong nabituin. At ang aking tagumpay, tagumpay ng aking lahi, tagumpay ng aking libing, ang tanging niniliging at hinahanap. Hangat ko'y tagumpay natin lahat. Ako ay may isang munting pangarap sa aking dakilang lupain. Pagsasama-sama nating pagsisikap, sama-sama rin mararating. Ang ibang-ibang araw, isang katutuan. Dito isang araw, isang kapuluan. Sama-sama nating abutin, pinagkama tayong nabituin. At ang aking tagumpay, tagumpay ng aking lahi, tagumpay ng aking ibig, ang tanging minimiti at hinahanap. Hangat ko'y tagumpay natin lahat. Hangat ko'y tagumpay natin lahat. Tagumpay natin lahat.
Thank you so much, CEU Singers Makati. Alam natin, sa gitna man ng pandemya, sabay-sabay pa rin nating aabutin yung ating mga naudlot na pangarap. Papasaan ba't magtatagumpay din tayo? At susunod nating speaker ngayong hapon ay isang respetadong profesor mula sa Ateneo de Manila University. Kaya maghanda na po tayo sa kanyang susunod na sasabihin sa atin kanyang mensahe. So, Dr. Jeyeel Cornello is Associate Professor and the Director of the Development Studies Program at the Ateneo de Manila University and Honorary Research Associate at the Divinity School of Chung Chi College at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Jeyeel, who is Associate Editor of the journal Social Sciences and Missions, has published extensively on religion in the Philippines. The broad theme of his work is religious change with respect to youth, politics, and development. His scholarly writings have appeared in a number of edited volumes and leading journals, including Religion, State and Society, Politics, Religion and Ideology, and Social Compass. He is the author of Being Catholic on the Contemporary Philippines, Young People Reinterpreting Religion in 2016, which the Journal of World Christianity has featured in a book symposium in 2018. He is also the editor of Rethinking Filipino Millennials, Alternative Perspective on Misunderstood Generation in 2020, and lead editor of the Routledge International Handbook of Religion in Global Society in 2021. For his scholarship, Jeyeel received 2 national awards: the Virginia A. Miralao Excellence in Research Award from the Philippine Social Science Council and the Outstanding Young Scientist Award from the National Academy of Science and Technology in 2017. Dr. Cornello finished his PhD in sociology in 2011 at the National University of Singapore with a scholarship grant from the Asia Research Institute. He has since held visiting posts at Lancaster University, Lucian Blaga University of Cebu, Mindanao State University Iligan Institute of Technology, and the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and was a postdoctoral fellow at the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Religious and Ethnic Diversity in Göttingen. Given his expertise, he is willing to given this expertise on religion, politics, and youth, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Cornello.
Hello, Professor Edu. Kamusta ka na?
Hello, good afternoon.
Good
Take it away,
afternoon.
sir.
Yes, napakaganda ng ating conversation just now with Richard Havdarian. Always in awe of his work and his erudition. And hopefully nagkaroon yun ng inspiration sa marami sa atin. Nakita ko yun sa mga comments po ninyo. I will be shifting gears this afternoon. In the next 30 minutes or so, no, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to just focus on a very specific segment of our population, young people. Batid ko ng ating pinag-uusapan ay social media. Pero I think I will be irresponsible if I don't focus on how our behavior, and especially young people, and marami sa atin belong to that demographic, I will be irresponsible if I don't talk about how we as young people behave on social media and how that behavior affects our social and political state today and arguably in the future. So, ladies and gentlemen, in the next 30 minutes or so, allow me to focus on the elections and the Filipino youth. Sabihin nyo, nako, elections, nako, politics na tayo kay Richard, kay Havdarian. Ngayon, politics pa rin tayo dito. Precisely because this is exactly what social media does sa ating lipunan, ladies and gentlemen. And many of you who are young, our students right now, and maybe the young faculty, will readily understand this. There are many angles, when we talk about social media, and maybe we can talk about them also during the open forum. But I think we will be irresponsible if we do not focus on how our behavior on social media shapes our social and political state today and in the future. So maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat sa Centro Escolar University for giving me this opportunity. This is my second time to give a talk for CEU, and it always is a privilege kasi I really know that the interactions afterwards are going to be very, very good. So you're seeing now on your screen my title. Okay, simulan natin ito. I'm going to read for you, ladies and gentlemen, this quote by the spokesperson na binanggit kanina ni Richard in one of his interviews, by spokesperson James Jimenez. In one of his writings, he said, "I challenge you and your generation to lead the way forward so that the rest of us may follow. I have no doubt that you are up to the task. You have to be. An entire nation is depending on you." Sino ang kausap ni James Jimenez, the spokesperson James Jimenez? Obviously, young people. So he is challenging you, students. He is challenging us, young people, and I would say nakasama pa ako doon sa demographic na yan. He's challenging us our generation to lead the way forward. So naniniwala siya that young people can make a difference in our social and political future. Some of you would agree with that. So if you agree with it, please share with me your thoughts. Naniniwala ba kayo na, ang kabataan nga ba talaga ang pag-asa ng bayan pagdating sa politika? Ang kabataan nga ba ang pag-asa ng bayan pagdating sa estado ng ating lipunan? Please share with me your thoughts on Facebook or our YouTube stream right now, and we would love to read some of them later on. So sabi yan ni spokesperson James Jimenez. I'm going to read for you another quote, this time by the president of the National Union of Students in the Philippines. So some months ago, nagkasama kami ni Jeyeel Roperos, her name is, sa isang Twitter space, no, conversation. So active kami sa Twitter, and so nagkasama kami, so nagkakwentuhan kami about many issues, and she said this in one interview after that Twitter space, if I'm not mistaken. Sabi niya, as youths, tayong mga kabataan, bilang mga kabataan, which make up a substantial proportion of the voting population, we have a huge role to play in the upcoming elections, and that is to vote for comprehensive and competitive leaders. So here comes Jeyeel saying na, so kanina si James Jimenez na nagsasalita, adult. Ito naman, bata, college student saying na, oo nga, yes, let's make a difference. We have a huge role to play in the upcoming election, and that is to vote for comprehensive and competitive leaders. Ladies and gentlemen, my students and my fellow teachers, I want us to interrogate ang mga claims na ito. Pag pinakinggan natin itong mga statements na ito, pag binasa natin ang mga statements na ito, anong makikita natin? The youth will save us. As you see on your screen right now, the youth will save us. Nasabihin pa natin yung sinabi ni Jose Rizal na ang kabataan ang pag-asa ng bayan. And it inspires something so visceral in us, something so deep within us na, yeah, totoo, kabataan na magliligtas sa atin. Now, ako kasi, isa akong sociologist. Ang expertise ko ay sociology of religion at saka sociology of youth. Ang mga sociologists, and some of you who have already taken up your sociology classes, maybe in HUMS, maybe in college, some of you know that sociologists ay medyo nambabasag ng chip. We always ask the questions, but why? Or but what? Really? Ganun ang mga tanong ng mga social scientists. Kanina nabanggit ni Richard, critical. Sa mundo ng mga sociologists, ang ibig sabihin ng critical ay huwag ka masyadong maniwala agad sa sinasabi ng lahat. So therefore, in the same critical spirit, I'm asking ourselves today, in the next 30 minutes, the youth will save us? Really? How valid is this claim? At makikita nyo yung connection ng social media dyan later on. And again, I would really love to hear your thoughts, comments, feedback, questions about this. Ano gagawin ko? In the next part of my presentation, bibigyan ko kayo ng statistical data. Sino ba ang mga registered youth? Bibigyan ko kayo ng mga youth voting patterns. Ito, juicy. Bilang isang sociologist, I am very enamored with quantitative data, statistics. Papakitaan ko kayo ng mga statistical data. Sino ba ang mga binoto ng mga Pilipino ng mga nakaraang eleksyon pagkabataang Pilipino? Magugulat po kayo sa magiging datos na ipapakita ko sa inyo. At pangatlo, i-unpack natin yung konsepto ng woke. Usong-uso po yun ngayon. Lahat tayo, we want to be woke. Pero sino ba yun? At ano bang ibig sabihin ng pagiging woke sa panahon natin ngayon? Are you ready? Good. Simulan natin sa statistical data. Noong 2017, ladies and gentlemen, 55.7 million Filipinos were in fact registered. Okay? So in context, no, tayo ay nasa 115 million na bilang mga Pilipino or so, pero hindi naman lahat ay eligible to vote kasi 18 years old and above lang. So 18 years old and above na registered voters noong 2016, kung kailan nanalo si President Duterte, ay 55.7 million registered voters. Ang tanong, bumoto ba silang lahat? The answer is no, kasi 43.7 million ang bumoto. Mataas ba yon? The answer is yes, mataas yon kasi 78% yon na voter turnout. No, sa ibang bansa, no, lalo na when you go to Europe, mababa, no? Mababa ang voter turnout. And it really speaks a lot about political apathy or yung sense ng parang disillusionment ng mga kabataan when it's about politics, no? Sa Pilipinas, pag tiningnan natin, mataas, 78%. And right now, as we speak, people are queuing to register for the elections, di ba? For 2022. So sa gitna ng mainit na panahon, tapos biglang uulan, they're still queuing. So there is a lot of electoral involvement sa ating mga Pilipino, which leads me to the second statistical data. Ngayon, 2021, for 2022, ano ang voter profile natin? Apparently, pumalo na tayo sa 61 million registered voters. Now, 61 million voters, so instead of giving you the broad picture, bigyan na natin ng pansin yung mga kabataan. Sino ba yon? For the sake of argument, 18 to 24 at 25 to 29. You're seeing it on your screen right now, folks. So 18 to 24 years old, based on the data, some months ago ko pa ito nahango, tapos bibigyan ko kayo ng mas updated in a bit. 18 to 24 years old, na Pilipino, there are 19.5 million. So a lot of you students belong to this category. In total, there are about 19.5 million of you. Ang tanong, ilan sa inyo ang rehistrado? 11.1 million. Okay? Posibleng tumaas na yan because ilang buwan na rin itong datos na ito at hindi na pa-update yung ating data. Okay? Paano naman dun sa inyong mga teachers ngayon or mga professors na mas matanda ng kaunti sa inyo, 25 to 29 years old? That age bracket, folks, merong 9.3 million Filipinos. Ilan ang botante? Ilan ang registered voters? Mataas. 88.8 million. So over time, dahil dun sa register to vote or magrehistro kayo, siguro dahil sa sama ng loob sa mga nangyayari, actually, sinasabi ng COMELEC in a recent report na apparently, pumapalo na sa 52% of total registered voters ay mga kabataang Pilipino. And folks, no, and just to be clear, pag sinabing youth, masyadong broad yung definition natin. Sometimes it's 18 to 24, sometimes it's 18 to 29, sometimes it's even 18 to 39. So pag sinama natin yung hanggang 18 to 39, papalo na 52% ng mga Pilipino ay registered, 52% na mga registered voters ay mga kabataang Pilipino or 18 to 39 years old. In other words, ayan na naman si Secretary James Jimenez, makikita nyo dun sa babang linya, medyo naputol yung aking screenshot dyan. Sabi niyo, that's how significant the youth vote is in the coming election. So kayo, again, yung tanong ko po sa inyo, significant nga ba? Naniniwala ba kayo that the youth can shape the voter, the turnout of the elections? Share with me your thoughts, no? Dito sa Facebook, basahin natin later on. Dito sa YouTube, basahin natin later on. Share with me your thoughts. Naniniwala ba kayong mga kabataan, that you can sway the voter turnout and sway the results of the elections next year? Ang ipapakita ko sa inyo ngayon ay, medyo babasag lang ako ng kaunting trip. I want you to understand that maybe siguro dapat mag-take a step back tayo at pagnilay-nilayan natin, are young people really voting for the right kinds of candidates? Noong 2019, at ako ay regular contributor sa tinatawag na Thought Leaders section ng Rappler. Ito yung opinion section. So karaniwan ng mga nagsusulat siya mga academics, no, mga professors. And so I have a regular contribution there on a monthly basis. In 2019, just before the elections, ang ginawa ko, I wrote this piece. Whom exactly are the youth voting for? Ano ginawa ko? So, ginamit ko ang survey data galing sa Pulse Asia. So, national survey. Alam ko, yung iba sa inyo nagtatanong ang mga survey. Nako, hindi naman yan reliable. Kung gusto nyo pong itanong yan later on, pag-usapan natin later on. Ipapaliwanag ko sa inyo yung science behind survey construction and sampling, no? Kaya dapat maniwala tayo sa mga survey data. Pero anyway, put that aside for now. What I did was in 2019, I asked Pulse Asia, hey folks, mga kaibigan ko kasi, pwede bang patingin naman ng survey data? Tapos paki-disaggregate according to age. Bakit ko natanong? Bakit ako interesado? Kasi pag nasa Twitter ako, ang makikita ko ay, wow, and active ako sa Twitter, no? Makikita ko parang, wow, lahat ng mga kabataan are voting for certain candidates, no? Yung mga tinatawag nilang progresibo o tinatawag nilang mga matatalino at magagaling at mga passionate, no? Sila dapat ang iboto ng mga Pilipino, ng kabataan. So, kung ako, mako-convince ako sa social media, parang oo nga, ito ang boses ng kabataan. Again, sociologists are always asking the question, totoo nga ba? So, use survey data, papakita ko sa inyo ang naging resulta ng aking statistical, ng disaggregation. This is really just descriptive statistics, nothing sophisticated here. On your left column, makikita niyo yung 18 to 24. On the right column, 25 to 34. Sa 18 to 24, sino ang mga voting preferences ng mga kabataang Pilipino? Lapid, Poe, Bongo, Bong Revilla, Villar, Pimentel, Cayetano, De La Rosa, Angara, Estrada, Binay. Sa 25 to 34 years old, sino ang nakikita natin pangalan? Number 1 to 12 maybe? Villar, Lapid, Cayetano, Poe, Angara, Binay, Go, Bong Revilla, Bato de la Rosa, Marcos, si Aimee ito, Ejercito, Estrada. Ano po napansin ninyo? Same pattern ng general voting preferences ng mga Pilipino. Hindi pumalo, halimbawa, yung tinatawag na 8 diretso. Again, I am not embracing a specific political party in my presentation today, pero gusto ko lang ipakita sa inyo yung kaibahan ng nakikita natin sa social media, and I'm speaking to our students and our young people who are active on social media. Pag tinignan natin sa social media, wow, Samira Gutok, Chel Jokno, Nery Colmenares, yung mga parang ito yung mga matatalinong vote, no? The woke vote. Pero pag tinignan natin yung estado at yung realidad ng voting preferences ng mga kabataan, we're seeing a very different picture. Nasaan dyan yung 8 diretso? Si Aquino, si Bambam, ang layo na niya sa 18 to 24. Si Colmenares, ang layo. Si Chel Jokno, wala at all. Si Samira Gutok, wala din at all. So I'm asking you, okay ba kayo? Masaya ba kayo sa naging voting preferences ng mga kahenerasyon ninyo, ng mga kabataan? Yung mga adults in our crowd right now, my fellow lecturers and professors, are you happy with the voting preferences of our young people in 2019? Share with me your thoughts, and it would be nice to read some of them later during the open forum. Nangangalahati na tayo, ano? Ano pa? Hindi pa dyan nagtatapos ang aking statistical data, ladies and gentlemen. Sino ang binoto ng mga kabataan, millennials? Sino ang mga binoto ng mga kabataan for president noong 2016? Tantananan. Sabi dito ni Mahar Mangahas, president ng SWS, naka-highlight yan on your screen right now. Sino po ang kanilang binoto? Sabi ni Mahar Mangahas kasi nagkaroon sila ng exit poll. So after bumoto, sinurvey yan ng SWS. At ang nakita ay, the younger the voter, the more the appeal of Duterte. Ibig sabihin, pag tinignan nyo yung naka-highlight na paragraph sa taas, mataas ang lead ni President Duterte, 33-point lead. Sa 18 to 24, ni President Duterte, lamang na lamang siya kay Mar Rojas. Lamang na lamang din si President Duterte by 26 percentage points kay Mar Rojas pagdating sa age 25 to 34. So, ibig sabihin, binoto ng maraming mga kabataan si President Duterte. Again, I'm asking you right now, my fellow professors and our students right now, are you happy with the voting preferences or the voting patterns of our young people in 2016 and in 2019? Sir Edu, how much longer do I have? Just to be sure.
Sir, I think you still have 10 minutes more.
Okay, cool. Cool. Okay. I hope nag-enjoy po ang ating mga audience right now sa ating lecture na sa ating presentation na ito. Share with me your thoughts. Basahin natin yan later on. Ito pa. So in other words, pagdating sa social media, hindi tayo pwedeng maniwala na kung ano yung nakikita natin sa social media tungkol na ito yung mga boses ng kabataan, ayun na. Kaya minsan gusto kong maging maingat tayo. Isa itong takeaway. This is one of the takeaways that I would like you to have, my friends, ladies and gentlemen, from this presentation. You don't believe, you don't take what you hear and see on social media as the voice of the public. Those are two different things. It's a different world what social media tells us, portrays to us. It's a different world, the reality outside. I don't like the online offline distinction, but for now, that makes sense. The online voice and the offline voice, those are two different realities. No, again, it's a mechanical distinction, but it works for the sake of argument. Para lang mabasag ng konting yun natin yung ating trip, para I just wanted to show to you the class dimension. Apparently, folks, the richer you are, according to the exit polls ng SWS, the richer you are, the more chances that you voted for President Duterte. Tingnan nyo yung first first row, class ABC. Kay President Duterte, 45.9%. Ang susunod niyan, Rojas na ang layo. Pero pagdating sa mga urban poor at sa mga mahihirap, let's say class E, no, yung ating mga indigents, mas hati sila. 35.3% voted for President Duterte, pero 28% also voted for Mar Rojas. Hindi malayo. Kumpara nyo doon sa 45.9% versus 18.9%. So that already tells us it's the richer Filipinos who had more inclination to support President Duterte, at least as far as the survey data is concerned. But obviously, across all classes, nanalo talaga si President Duterte. Pero kung i-disaggregate natin yung ating analysis, you realize that there is a big disparity when it comes to class A, B, and C. Tapos, ito, educated. Sasabihin ng iba, di ba, meron tayong mga konsepto ng bobotante na parang binoto mo yan kasi mahirap ka, kasi bobo ka, hindi ka edukado. Tapos lahat ng ating voter education, right? All our initiatives kami sa sa university, no, sa Ateneo, parang okay, voter education, sinang iniisip natin parati urban poor. Pero let's look at the voting patterns of the less educated. Apparently, it's really those who are college graduates who again voted for President Duterte. Those who only had some high school divided. Obviously, panalo pa rin si President Duterte, but not that far from Mar Rojas, 25.7%. Again, it's nice to look at statistical data because they reveal to us the reality that we are not familiar with because we're only exposed to what we see on Facebook or on Twitter or on Instagram. No? Or yung iba sa atin, yung may mga Viber group pa ng mga tito at mga tita, doon lang, kung ano nakikita natin ng mga sinishare ng mga tito at tita natin, akala natin, those are the real stories. Not quite. Not all the time. Okay? Next, the last point of my presentation before we begin our open forum. The last point is this. Young people, they're woke. Mga kabataan Pilipino, you can save us. You can save us in 2022. Bakit? Kasi kayo yung woke. You are educated and all that. But my friends, it's time for us to unpack the concept of woke. What does woke mean? Sa totoo lang, ginagamit ito ng maraming mga Pilipino kasi ito, for example, right? There's this online article featuring the different woke social media actors. So some of these Twitter accounts you might be familiar with if you're active on Twitter. And you see that every day they say something and then they go viral, thousands and thousands of shares. And the claim nito is that, second paragraph, first sentence. These personalities are saving the country from historical revisionism through viral memes, healthy discourses, and witty comebacks. So these are your woke people. Sa Pilipinas, I just want to unpack this. Give me 1 or 2 minutes to explain this. Pag sinabi nating woke, we're actually referring to I am smart, you are not. Why am I smart? Because I am choosing certain candidates, you are not. Very concretely, and I don't want to sound political here, pero if most of the time on social media, if you do a content analysis of the data, woke because you're anti-Duterte, you're bobo if you're DDS, diehard Duterte supporters, if you are supportive of President Duterte. And the reality is, ladies and gentlemen, on social media, the woke is an echo chamber. They talk among themselves. They like each other's comments. They like each other's posts. They say share each other's posts. The other crowd, for the lack of a better term, the DDS crowd, no, for the sake of argument and for the sake of analysis, right? The DDS crowd is very different. They like each other's posts. They share each other's posts. They comment on each other's posts. Seldom do they interact with one another unless there are controversial issues. For example, Tony Gonzaga and Bongbong Marcos. Merong away ngayon yan. But most of the time, these are two different social worlds. This is why, ladies and gentlemen, I want us to be very critical. Again, I'm going to use that word critical. And by this, I don't see Richard Havdarian, sabi niya kinana critical is distilling all the information that you have and then arriving at a reasonable conclusion. Ang sa akin, critical is we can define it in a different manner. Critical meaning not accepting everything that you see on your screen. Specifically, not accepting it to be the real representation of the reality. Why? This is what echo chambers do to us. It convinces you that you have a big voice, when in reality, you're actually talking only amongst yourselves. And if you do a social network analysis, you realize that you're actually really just talking amongst each other, amongst the same people. Kaya, naiintindihan ko yung mga komento na ang woke ay very elitist, which is very different, my friends, from how the woke culture shaped the Black Lives Matter movement sa Amerika. Actually, yung konsepto ng woke, nagsimula yan sa Black Lives Matter. No, wake up, kasi Black Lives Matter too. And eventually, even white people joined them. And then eventually, it spilled over to the Asian Lives Matter kasi they're also being discriminated against in public. Kaya naiintindihan ko yung konsepto na being woke is actually, in the end, being elitist. This is a piece that I wrote back in 2019, last year, kasi nadidismaya ako dun sa kayabangan ng maraming mga woke social media actors. They simply dismiss the other side. They dismiss the DDS, for example, or they simply dismiss people who are not like them to be bobo. And the moment you venture into that, my friends, you turn your back on the promise of democracy. What is democracy? It's the ability to disagree with one another and yet communicate with one another. And the whole objective is to arrive at a better conclusion. However, because of the polarized political atmosphere that we have, nagiging mayabang. Dilawan, komunista, woke, bobotante, etc., etc. So that's another takeaway for you, my friends. Maybe we can think about how we can better engage the other person with whom we do not agree. Do we simply cancel them? Do we simply block them? Sa pamilya natin, if we disagree, do we simply do not talk to them? Mga tito-tita natin, after dinner, labas ka na? Or can we do something to bridge the gap, extend an olive branch? Let's try to understand one another. That's hard, but that's what democracy asks us to do. Last few points. Kaya naiintindihan ko si Daniel Padilla, ang aking favorite philosopher. Sabi niya sa kaya nung in-interview siya, bakit ka hindi aktibo sa social media, Daniel? Sabi niya, maraming tao na naninirahan, para sa maraming tao na naninirahan sa social media, yun na ang kanilang realidad. And I'm not really a fan of Daniel Padilla, but for this particular moment, yes, Daniel, I salute you. I agree with you. and he understands it because it gives you that impression that is the only reality when in fact it is not. Sa pagtatapos, my friends, ladies and gentlemen, ano ang mga lessons natin? On the right side of your screen, this is my point. We are a fragmented generation. We are fragmented. There's no one youth vote. We need to recognize this reality if we wish to harness the potential of the youth in shaping contemporary politics. Adults, we tell the youth, please save us. When in reality, there's no one singular, homogeneous, monolithic youth. Ang iniisip ba natin ay youth na edukado? Paano naman yung mga out-of-school youth? Are they part of our conversation? Paano naman yung mga kabataang apektado ng war on drugs? Are they also part of our conversation? What about young people who were affected by conflict in Marawi, ang mga Moro? Are they part of our conversation as well? How about young people who belong to other universities who are not up to par? How about young people who are facing a lot of difficulties in life, mental challenges, depression, dysfunctional families? Are they also part of our conversation? Every time we say the Filipino youth, this is my sociological assessment, we are actually betraying ourselves because we are not recognizing the difficulties and the fragmentations na pinagdadaanan ng maraming mga kabataan. So dun sa third bullet point ko dyan sa screen, ang tanong ko, to whom are we referring when we say Filipino youth? Folks, education, class, employment, regionalism, they all divide us. Unless we confront the reality of these divisions, we will never arrive at a true democratic and hopefully collegial understanding of one another. And if that were the case, our society will continue to be divided, even polarized, as it is already today. For those of you who are interested in this is the book that Sir Edu mentioned when he was introducing me just now. Dito namin inilahad ng aking mga co-authors yung fragmentations na ito. Sa pagtatapos ng aking lecture, I want to just leave you with this concept called intergenerational justice. So Dr. Cornello, so hindi natin pwede palang asahan ng mga kabataan. My answer is yes. Kasi pag ginagawa natin yon, ipinapasa natin ang burden sa kabataan for the mistakes that we committed as adults. Intergenerational justice is a philosophy that asks us to honor each other and make sure that the choices we make as adults will leave a positive and lasting impact on our young people. And our young people, when they grow up and they become adults, they will carry on thinking about their responsibility, not just for themselves, not just for their children, but also the future. In other words, we need to shift the conversation from away from the youth alone, but towards all of us. Adults, we constitute what? Practically 50% of the population. Can we shape the elections? We can. So why are we always passing it on to young people? Young people, do not carry the burden by yourselves alone. Engage us. Engage your professors. Challenge us with tough questions. If you disagree with us, challenge us. And hopefully, in the spirit of intergenerational justice, we will be willing to engage you as well. This is what is at stake for our society in 2022. In the final analysis, my friends, we all have a responsibility for our society. This is what intergenerational justice is asking us to do. And therefore, we should step away from social media and begin to engage one another and shape the character of our society and our politics today and in the future. Maraming salamat po. My contact details are right there in front of you if you're interested to reach out. Salamat po.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cornelio. My God, napaka-substantial ng iyong presentation. Ang dami-dami naming natutunan, specifically yung pag-analyze mo piece by piece yung voting population, lalong-lalo na ng mga kabataan ngayon kasi ang daming mga kabataan ngayon ang nagko-comment, okay?
Ano sabi nila? Hindi ko pa nakikita. Ano sabi nila?
Oo, ang dami nagko-comment ngayon. But before anything else, ito unang tanong ko muna. Kasi nasabi mo naman yung mga terms ngayon na ginagamit sa social media, echo chamber, cancel culture, pa-woke, ganyan. Pero how do we make or how do we transfer yung reality of social media on the ground ba? Kasi 'di ba sinasabi natin sa echo chamber, feeling mo ang daming nakikinig sa iyo, feeling mo ang daming naniniwala sa iyo, pero in fact there are a few only, 'di ba? Pero how do you make that social reality, social media reality? How do you transfer that on the ground? Na sa mga out of school youth, sa mga tricycle driver, sa mga jeepney driver, paano natin gagawin 'yon?
This is such a sharp question, and I'm so glad that we're beginning this open forum with that question, Sir Edu. Ang talino ng tanong na yan. Simple lang po ang aking sagot, Sir Edu. Makipagtalakayan. Makipagtalakayan. Nabanggit mo kanina tricycle drivers and so forth. No? Labas na kasi yun eh. Ako ang challenge ko muna sa atin, sa pamilya natin.
Oh, yes.
Atin lang, Sir Edu, ha? Ang aking kapatid ay isang napakagaling at highly accomplished na professional. Pero magkabilat, magkabanggaan talaga kami. Pag nagdi-dinner kami or nagla-lunch kami, nag-family reunion kami, talagang masaya kami sa umpisa pero pagdating sa dulo, hindi na kami nagpapansinan. No? Kasi talaga sasama.
May ganyan din akong kapatid, sir. May ganyan din akong kapatid. Diba? Clash sa politics.
Diba? Diba? So ang tanong, kaya mo bang mag-yoga sa gitna ng dinner na yan, ng lunch na yan, para okay, irerespeto kita, iintindihin kita kahit ayaw ko sa'yo. Diba? Kahit ayaw ko sa sinasabi mo. And that, my friends, is their answer. Kasi yun yung problema eh. Yun ang ikinakasama ng loob ko sa uri ng politika na meron tayo. Pag galit tayo sa kanya, dilawan. Conversation ender yun eh. Pag galit tayo sa kanya, komunista ka kasi, kaya ka ganyan mag-isip. Conversation ender. Ako, nagsusulat sa Rappler. Kaya ka ganyan mag-isip kasi tagasulat ka sa Rappler. Pero ano ba kinalaman ng Rappler sa pag-isa sinulat ko? Ang sinulat ko naman is sociological at galing sa talino ko at hindi dahil Rappler ako. Right? Pero, conversation ender. And I think this is really also, honestly, no? This is the result of the character of our leadership. Pag ayaw ka sa'yo, ipapakulong kita. Pag ayaw ka sa'yo, ipasasara kita. Conversation ender. Gaya na sinabi ni Richard kanina, this is not strengthening our institutions. They destroy institutions. And from a sociological perspective, what are institutions if not basic relationships that we have with one another? Solid institutions begin with solid relationships. Destroy these relationships, you destroy the institution. I challenge you, my students and my friends, take the moral high ground. Tapang-tapangan nyo at mag-yoga muna kayo bago pumunta sa mga lunch at mga dinner kasama ng inyong mga tito at tita na ayaw nyo kausap.
Yes, so talagang it starts within your family, no? Sa pamilya talaga. Oo.
Yes.
Kasi mahirap din na kasi kagaya ko lagi sabi ko nga sa inyo, sir, nagka-clash kami ng kapatid ko tungkol sa politika, ganyan, tungkol sa batas, nagka-clash talaga kami. Tungkol sa kung ano man, 'di ba? Pero at the end of the day, magkapamilya pa rin kami, 'di ba? So, yeah, it really starts, 'di ba, within your family. Ayan, so ang daming coming in questions natin. There are some questions here. Okay, comments. Okay. And okay. Isa-isahin natin. Yan. Sabi niya, as a resident in our town, talakayan is a big thing. Yeah, discussion, 'di ba? Talakayan is a big thing. I often hear people from different walks in life, different ages with their own perspectives. It's too tiring to see people on social media with those concepts, but hearing people naturally say what they truly feel. Walang cancel culture, walang pa-woke, walang terms na kahit ano, hindi ko alam. Sabi yan ni Ilian Castro. Ayan. So,
salamat, Ilian.
Kailangan talaga nating makipag-usap. We do
Totoo.
not 'di ba?
Totoo. Kasi tinan mo yung sinabi ni Elena, no, or Elian, sabi niya, no, but hearing people naturally say what they truly feel, there are emotions at stake. Yung sa Twitter kasi wala tayong nakikitang emotions eh. Nakikita natin laging galit. 'Di ba? Laging galit, no? Laging kinansa si Tony Gonzaga, si Bongbong Marcos, laging galit. Pero when you talk to ordinary people, the emotions are just disappointment, sama ng loob, galit. Yun yung pwede nating pasukin eh. Unawain.
Correct. Understanding talaga. So sir, may isang tanong ko ha. Ano ba yung
Yes.
kulang ngayon sa mga kabataan? Kasi how do we prod them to engage in politics? How do we encourage them to participate in socio-political issues? Kasi ang nakikita ko ngayon sa mga kabataan, yun nga, may apathy sila and apolitical sila. So how do we encourage them? Kasi ano yung kulang sa kanila? O baka may kulang naman sa atin na mga educator na kaya na skills na dapat ituro natin sa kanila. Baka may kulang din sa atin, baka kasalanan din natin pala. Ano
Correct. That's a brilliant question. Another brilliant question, Sir Edu. Research ko ito. This was part of my PhD years ago. At na-discover ko, young people are not apathetic because they don't want to be involved in politics. Hugas kamay. The reality is that they don't want to be involved in politics kasi ang lagi nilang sa iisipin ay, boboto nga ako. May epekto ba yung boto ko?
Yeah.
Magsasalita nga ako, magkokomento nga ako, pero may makikinig ba sa akin? Ang tawag ko doon ay political disillusionment. Political disillusionment. So, pag ganun ang terminology natin, magbabago yung ating calculus. It's no longer about apathy. Kasi pag sinabing apathy, hindi ako involved eh. When in fact, the reality is that young people are disillusioned. Ngayon, as we speak, many of you are familiar with the commercial of this politician. Hawak kamay niya yung mga urban poor youth at sinasabi niya na siya ay ang magbibigay ng kaayusan sa buhay ng mga urban poor youth na ito. Pero give me your record. Kailan ka talaga tumulong sa mga urban poor youth na yan? At syempre galing ako sa syudad kung saan sila naghahari at alam ko na pinapalayas lang nila ang mga urban poor sa syudad namin. Right? So in other words, young people are aware that politicians only use them during the elections and then after the elections, they're gone. So kung ako ang kabataan, bakit ako magtatataya? Kasi gagamitin mo lang ako eh. So this is my advice to my fellow professors and teachers, lecturers. Let's help young people to discover spaces where they can be truly effective. Kaya sila maingay sa social media kasi doon sila effective. Ang problema lang, echo chamber. Right? So the challenge is when we ask them to reflect, write reflection papers, to write, conduct projects, etc., let's ask them to go beyond. So halimbawa, concretely sa akin, sa mga papers ng mga estudyante ko are thesis. A lot of so I'm supervising undergraduate thesis right now. Tapos gusto nila, I want to interview Ateneo students. Come on, you don't want to talk to fellow Ateneo students. Go out. Yes. As simple as that can change them. Kasi may expose sila, shoot, iba pala yung aking akala ko, yun ang pananaw ng lahat.
May comment dito si Dr. Padulina. Ang ating presidente. What platform can we use for this kind of conversation in this virtual world that we find ourselves in, especially in the months before elections? So galing yan kay Dr. Padulina.
Oo nga, Dr. Padulina. Opo. Dr. Padulina, nasa Instagram po ba kayo? Dr. Padulina, nasa Discord, no? Yung mga ganyan.
Ayan, si Dr. Padulina.
Ayan, Dr. Padulina, you gotta answer me. Are you on Instagram?
I have an Instagram account, but I only lurk.
You do lurk. What
do
you notice?
I don't post anything.
Right. And what do you notice on IG? Very different from Facebook.
Oh, yes.
Diba? Very, very different from Facebook.
Hindi ko rin masasagot mabuti yun kasi wala akong Facebook account.
Wala rin kayo Facebook? Wow!
I had it canceled some months back.
Oh, wow. That's so brave of you. Because?
I don't have time for it.
Okay.
I
Or patience, maybe.
yeah, and so I will not be able to use it
I see.
wisely, as you say. It must be
I
used
see.
wisely.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I decided it's not,
Yeah. Yeah. My
and
honest,
I
my
might
honest.
put myself in danger also, with
Oh,
other
that's because
remarks.
yeah. Because of your stature then, and you
Yes.
will be.
Oh,
Yeah, no, I perfectly understand. Right now solitude is a luxury, di ba? Solitude is a luxury now. Well, the immediate answer I have there is that go organic wherever the young people are, engage them. Twitter Space, nung nilaunch po ang Twitter Space, ito yung mga verbal conversations happening on Twitter.
Mm-mm.
Oh, everybody's there. Mga friends ko who are historians, they would just at any time of the evening, 10 o'clock in the evening, 500 people showing up on Twitter Space. May mga ganon. Tayo po medyo to be honest, traditional na po tayo kasi nasa Facebook Live lang tayo at YouTube. Malayo
Mm-mm.
ang reach po nun, pero we're not really reaching people who are beyond
yes.
Facebook. And
Yes,
young people
I
are,
am told that's true. I'm told na
yeah.
Facebook is no longer the platform to use if you
Oo,
want to
it's
reach the young. That it's
correct.
more
It's for titos
Twitter.
and titas. Opo, it's for titos
Oo.
and titas.
Ano para sa kaming mga lolos and lolas.
Ayun, opo, opo.
Oo.
Nasa
For
Friendster po
titos
kayo.
na.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fadalina.
But
Thank you so
thank you
much.
very much. You really
Yeah.
gave a very good talk.
Thank you,
Very
ma'am. Appreciate it.
enlightening.
I
Thank you.
appreciate
Merong
it. Thank you.
Dr. Cornelio, may tanong dito. Ito, estudyante ko to nursing to, o nursing
Oh,
student.
wow.
How can we have
Wow.
a dialogue with another person whose political opinion seems to invalidate the sufferings
Ah.
that you or other people have experienced? From Mr. Jugarap, Casimir Jugarap. Yan. Sir, paano
Hello,
nga raw?
Casimir. Oo. Hello, Casimir. Casimir, that's a great question. Nursing student. And this is a question that can only come from nursing students kasi medyo may empathy ang mga nursing students. Ang rule ko to come across is you ask questions. You don't have to defend. You don't always have to bring out the facts because facts are cold. But the moment you ask questions, napansin ko yan sa Twitter, sa social media engagements ko, or when people reach out to me privately via Facebook, kunwari yung mga vitriolic, I would simply just ask them questions. Kunwari, war on drugs. Dapat lang mamatay, no? Yung mga tao. Tapos syempre tatanong ko sa kanya, yung mga drugista. Tatanong ko lang sa kanya, bakit sa tingin mo dapat silang mamatay? Kasi sila ay mga mga salot sa lipunan. Tapos bibigyan ko lang ulit ng tanong, paano naman yung mga pamilya nila at yung mga anak nila na may iwanan? At paano naman kung hindi naman sila totoo na durigista sila? At nakita naman natin that even teenagers like sila Kian, di ba? They were killed just like that. Kasi the reality is that at some point, the law enforcers were being really mandated to produce bodies, no? In a very literal sense.
May quota sila, Doc.
Yes, totoo. Thank you yes, may quota talaga. May quota, and journalists have already brought that out in the open. So, Casimir, that's my honest assessment. Kasi pag ilalaban mo na parang 3,000 people died in the time of Ferdinand Marcos, cold facts babalikan ka lang yan ng another fact na parang, napagawa niya naman yung Lang Center napagawa niya naman yung CCP napagawa niya naman yung San Juanico Bridge right? So ask questions so parang tama ba na halimbawa na ipasara lahat ng mga media at kontrolin nila ang lahat ng mga balita? Yung mga basic questions like that, make them think. It won't work all the time, but at the very least, they cannot step away from your conversation without thinking about the questions that you raised to them.
Yun. So, sana nasagot, Casimir, yung tanong mo. Ito, may isang tanong po from Professor ng Bayan, Professor Rico Gonzalez. Oo.
Yes.
Are the young people over-entertained? What's your take on this, Dr. Cornello? Over-entertained kasi may TikTok na ngayon, sir, di ba?
Yeah,
Punta
that's
ka
true.
ng
That's
TikTok.
true.
Naku, ang dami makikita doon.
That's true. Well, media scholars would know that it's a hyper-mediated reality. So you know that, diba? Yung lahat na sa communication studies and media studies, you know that this is the mediation that we have right now is unprecedented. So are they over-entertained? The answer is yes, from a historical perspective. Pero I don't want to frame it like that only. Bakit? Kasi every generation, ang perception ng mas nakakatanda sa kanila ay over-entertain sila. So nung 1920s, 1940s, 1950s nung nauso yung mga ano ba yung mga sinasayaw nila Dr. Padolina when she was younger, no? yung mga sinasayaw nila at mga back in the 1950s Beatles, right? The moment that they entertain Beatles, ang tingin sa kanila, I'm very sure ng mga lolo at lola nila ay napapariwara na sila. So ang tawag doon ay generational gap in layman's terms. Ang tinatawag natin sa sociology no na intergenerational tension because the values are changing. So tingnan din natin 'yon. Kasi yung over-entertainment na tingin natin sa mga kabataan, actually it is also a space for young people to learn. Sa Twitter halimbawa, sa TikTok, nagkalat yung mga woke, no? Nagkikwento about ivermectin, bakit ito masama, mga pharmacists at mga historians using TikTok in a very entertaining manner. So over-entertained, yes, but also highly educational.
Correct. Okay, eto isang tanong na lang Dr. Nelio. Now that there is an attempt to revise history, meron tayong historical revisionism ngayon, 'di ba? Sa social media. Kalat na nga ngayon eh. As we speak, kalat na ngayon yung mga kung ano-anong
ay nako.
Diba? Okay. How do you what will be your advice to the young people na they wouldn't fall into this trap ng historical revisionism? Kasi alam naman natin, sige, banggitin na natin the Marcos issue, 'di ba? Paano nila kasi gusto natin sila maging critical, ayaw din naman natin silang spoon feed, 'di ba? Gusto natin maging critical, they have to think on their own. Ano yung gagawin dapat nila? Kanino sila sasangguni? Ano yung mga sources dapat nila? Yung mga ganun, sir.
Yeah. My advice is going to be very specific to our students, no? Our students at CEU, university students. My friends, my students, you are in a position that not many other Filipinos have. Not every Filipino youth has access to university education. Therefore, take advantage of the relationships that you have, number one, with one another, and then number two, with your professors. Talk, ask questions, seek help, advice. Diba nabanggit ko kanina intergenerational justice? Meaning to say, let's learn from one another, right? The easy answer, obviously, is mag-Wikipedia ka. But I don't want to resort to that, right? Kasi parang napaka-individualistic eh. I am going to read a book about Marcos and martial law. I'm going to read Primitivo Himijares, for example, right? Or many of these history books. You can do that, but let's go beyond that. Let's talk. So if you have friends who are convinced that it was a glorious period in time, ask them why. Why do you think that, right? And then later on, you talk to your professors, right? It would be nice if your professors could also help you think critically. But I understand that not all professors are very familiar, and that's the reality, no, Sir Edu. There are professors also who are not aware of the historical details. And I have encountered some of them in the course of my public lectures in other places. Yan.
Oo, yun nga. Kasi wala talagang part na ata ito ng machinations niya ata. But anyway, ganun po talaga, no? Kailangan talaga natin maging critical. Yun talaga yung natin, yung pwede nating sandata, 'di ba?
Correct. Critical at pakikipagtalakayan.
Correct.
No, kasi pag critical, masyadong sarili lang eh, individual lang. But I am asking us to step out. To step out in the open. Yeah.
Kasi yung mga nakikita natin ngayon sa Twitter, actually, sir, I follow you on Twitter.
Do you? I have to follow you back.
Nakikinig ako sa mga tawag nito yung sa space, 'di ba? Sa space ninyo.
Yes.
So nakikinig ako doon. And talaga totoo naman yun yung echo chamber, hanggang doon lang tayo eh. Yun nga yung problema natin, hindi natin na ibababa. Hindi tayo nakikipag-usap, hindi tayo nakikipagtalakayan. Walang conversation at all with them. And we always dismiss them. 'Di ba? Kapag kunyari tama ka po doon na may sinabi siya, sasabihin mo agad, o dilawan ka, o DDS ka. 'Di ba? Ganun agad yung ano natin eh, yung conversation natin. Hindi natin tinatanong bakit? Bakit
And that is the big irony of social media. Social media in the final analysis is not social. It's just a media.
Correct. Oo.
If you think about it, it's not social.
Tama.
Ay, gusto ko yung comment ni Ivan, no? Gusto ko yung comment ni Ivan. Saya makinig at makilahok sa ganitong progresibong usapan.
Tama sir. Oo, ang daming natutuwa. Kaya pinopost ko yung mga comments nila. Ayan.
Nakakatuwa naman. Salamat.
Maraming may alam. Sa isang grupo kung saan parte tayo, sa halip, matuwa tayo dahil marami tayong natututunan paniguran. Ito sir one last question. Ito, I want to know your thoughts about this. Kasi yan nga we are encouraging healthy discussion, healthy conversation with people na iba yung pananaw sa atin. Are you in favor of penalizing or legislating fake news? Kasi it's an attack against freedom of speech, it's an attack against freedom of expression, yung mga ganun eh. Do you think papasaba ito sa kongreso natin at magiging okay? Anong implication nito sa atin, lalo na sa well-enshrined constitutional right natin, freedom of expression?
Duda ako kung papasa yan sa Senado at sa Kongreso kasi marami sa kanila ang gumagamit ng fake news, ano? So it will be like shooting themselves in the foot, no? Parang political dynasty, di ba? Hindi mapasa-pasa kasi they will be shooting themselves in the foot. I don't have an immediate answer right now, Sir Edu, precisely because it's so difficult to define fake news. Right? What would be easier to legislate is the recognition of legitimate media outfits. Legitimate media outfits. Ang problema mo lang, madali lang yon before social media arrive. Ang problema mo lang on social media kasi anybody can claim that I am a news media company and that is where it really lies. Para sa akin, therefore, ang solution is, alam ko nabanggit niya kanina ni Richard yung parang really taking down all these fake news accounts and so forth. There are other steps that we can take. For example, make sure that every Facebook account is legitimate, owned by one person, right? The moment we do that, the moment Facebook does that, it will change the calculus forever. Kasi all of a sudden, you cannot have many other accounts, right? So yung mga troll farms, like companies and media companies who have like maintain thousands and thousands of accounts so para mag-trend yung kanilang mga hashtags, all of a sudden they can't do that anymore. Baka mas madali yun. Whereas fake news, it's a little too complicated to legislate.
Yes. Pero 'di ba meron ng provision dun sa bayanihan law, may fake news dun 'di ba? Ipe-penalize daw nila yung
pero
sa bayanihan law.
But how do you test that, 'di ba? How do you test that? And it's very easy to use it. Ang dangerous lang doon, it's very easy to use it against legitimate journalists. No? At nakita na natin yan in the past months, 'di ba? From libel to all sorts of suits against. Kunwari ako, I'm an opinion writer for Rappler. Anybody can say na fake news ako, 'di ba? Ang hirap labanan nun. Right? Mahirap labanan yun.
Okay, one last na talaga, sir, ito.
Sure. Okay lang. I'm still active. I'm still alive.
Question.
Yeah, sure.
How do you respond to smart shaming? Kasi ito naman yung ginagawa ng ibang tao. Kapag kunyari you are spitting facts, 'di ba? You're spitting facts, ang intelihente ng sagot mo, pero sasabihin nila, Eh di wow. Or yung mga ganun, o kaya naman,
Yeah.
eh di ikaw na magaling yun. How do you respond to that? Kasi parang ang pangit din naman, kaya nga kami nakikipag-engage para magkaintindihan tayo. Pero yung iba kasi, they smart shame people eh. Question is, have you
No,
been
that's
smart shamed?
ako hard na share ako. That's a great question. Parang I don't recall. Maybe behind my back. Maybe sa experience ko kasi, nasa smart shame ang isang tao kapag mayabang siya. It's not really so much about what the person knows, but yung yabang eh. And for us Filipinos, that it turns us off eh. Na parang if you're using your titles, your PhD, di ba? Or your title, yung professor, right? If you're using that to put people down, it's a smart shame ka talaga ng mga bata. It's a smart shame ka talaga. So kaya ako, in formal occasions, I would use the title doctor, pero in reality, parang it doesn't really matter. Right? Kasi nga, meron tayong responsibility as the people who are far more intelligent or more educated, quote unquote. We have a responsibility to help other people, but not to make them feel that they are bobo. The moment that we make them feel bobo, dun magkakaroon ng smart shaming. I may be wrong, but that's my assessment. That's my reading of the situation. Every time a person is smart shamed, it is precisely because mayabang yung taong yon. And again, conversation ender kasi ang kayabangan. So let's be very careful with our attitudes and dispositions in offline and online.
Ayan. Sir, Dr. Cornello, thank you very much for this very engaging discussion, 'di ba? Nakakatuwa kasi ang daming nagko-comment ngayon dito sa ating dito sa ating Facebook at saka sa Twitter at Facebook and YouTube natin tungkol sa ating pinag-uusapan ngayong araw na ito. Any final message, sir? Lalo na ngayon darating na ang national elections natin come May 2022.
Cool. Thank you, Sir Edu. My students, this is not the time to give up. This is not the time to be depressed. Sure, you may be affected, you may be deeply threatened, you may be saddened by the turn of events, you may even feel helpless. But this is not the time to give up. The moment we give up not just on our generation, but on our future. And in the principle of intergenerational justice, that's wrong. Why? Because we have a responsibility to fight not just for ourselves, but for the future. Please take up that sword, not for us, not for yourselves, but for the future. Let's be responsible for one another. And my message goes out to my peers, to my fellow professors, to my fellow lecturers, my fellow university administrators. Let's use every opportunity so that our universities are safe spaces where questions could be asked, where tough questions could be discussed critically. Not to make students feel that they're bobo, but to make them feel that questions are entertained in our spaces. Why? The university is the last space where disagreements could happen politely, respectfully. Let's not give up on our calling to build a stronger nation through an educated population. Maraming salamat po sa ating lahat. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cornello. Ang sarap ng usapan natin ngayon, no? Ang sarap.
Oo nga parang no dead air.
'Di ba? Oo. Sabi nga dito, sabi ni Jerome Bentanilla, thank you for this webinar, part 2 daw. Nako. PCCA. Yung Presidential Committee natin on Culture and the Arts. May part 2 daw dapat tungkol dito. Maraming salamat. Ayan. Sabi, very good discussion, very engaging. Congratulations. Ito, may Swiftie dito. Sabi nga po ni Taylor Swift, only the young can run.
Only the young can run.
I'm sorry. So thank you so much, Dr. Cornello. And thank you also to those who were commenting and engaging in our discussion. And now, I would like to have to break this monotony, diba? I will have a musical number from the CU Concert Band. At ang kanilang tutugtugin ay ang Pilipinas Kung Mahal. Okay, thank you so much, the CEU Concert Band, for that musical number. And now, for the closing remarks, may we call on the Vice President for Student Affairs, Dr. Carlito B. Olaer.
Good afternoon, everyone. There are three reasons why we are holding this convocation this afternoon. First is to celebrate the 114th foundation anniversary of Centro Escolar University, counting the years that's passed the century and 14 years of existence since its foundation on June 3, 1907. You may argue that's very old, or not so old, but still old. The second reason is to welcome the new school year 2021 and to welcome as well our students to enjoy, to grow, and to make their years of stay in the university a life-changing journey, even in this new normal. Together, that experience we have to create every minute of our days, every day of our years, and that makes our university always young. Want to argue with that? The third reason is for us to ask ourselves, what is our take on the theme of this convocation? We have heard our speakers talk about youth, elections, social media, dark trolling, woke culture, or even intergenerational justice. The question is where to go from here. The past is behind us. We cannot change it, but we can surely learn from it. The future is yet to come. Can we change our future? No one would know what our future will be. But we can create one with what we have right now, the present, which is a gift we cannot afford to squander. Master Ogway, the wise tortoise of the Kung Fu Panda movie, says, yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, but today is a gift. That is why it is called the present. We are the present. We are the gifts of our time. What do we do with our being gifted? Be the change we want to see in the world, as Mahatma Gandhi puts it. That is how we make use of our giftedness. We change our present, we change our tomorrow, and that makes all of us change agents. Influencers in a world addicted to or crazy about social media. Social media is changing our world, our ways of life. We are witnesses to its power. We are even end users of it, manipulated or empowered. Eric Wallman, an American author of socialnomics, said, we don't have a choice on whether we do social media. The question is how well we do it. The power of social media is it forces necessary change. And we ask, during elections, we have seen some elections around the world and how social media changed the election landscape. We can make it happen right here on our shores. We can use it to show who we are as decent people. And we stand for, or what we stand for, as God-fearing. We can use it as our voice and platform to bring across the message of responsibility and respect, decency and dignity, without the trolls, without the black voting, just conviction. That is the reason why we have campaigned very hard, appealing to our students and staff to register online if they are not yet registered. There is still time all our efforts to educate and make change happen will be wasted if we are not registered voters. Socrates, an ancient Greek philosopher, once said, "The secret of change is to focus our energy not in fighting the old, but on building the new." We can make that happen if we are registered voters. But again, we ask, against the backdrop of this pandemic, we have seen how social media fast-tracked help and response during this pandemic. And we have also witnessed how governments respond to this horrifying crisis. In turning points like this, men and women are defined. Heroes rise, villains fall. Governments either flourish or flounder. Sooner or later, all our social media platforms will be full of pubmats from candidates parading their successes during this pandemic. Would you take their words as success with chaos, deaths, unemployment hurting all of us? We have to be critical, prudent, and wise in our choices. In closing, C.S. Lewis, a British writer and lay theologian, said, "If we are all going to be destroyed by a virus, let that virus, when it comes, find us doing sensible and human things." Pope Francis prayed in his dissertation, "Perhaps this virus is actually God's way of purifying and cleansing our souls, bringing us back to Him." I believe all these things are happening for a reason. God allows social media impact its way to our daily lives for us to connect with Him. God allows this pandemic to happen for us to change and renew the old order of this earth. And God allows elections to happen for us to make things right for our own sakes. In the Gospel of St. Matthew chapter 9 verse 17, the Lord said, "Neither is new wine put into old wineskins. If it is, the skins burst, and the wine is spilled, and the skins are destroyed. But new wine is put into fresh wineskins, and so both are preserved." This may be harsh, but have strength to receive it, because this command challenges us to make all things new, and it is never too late to make things right. So we need to act together, not as fragmented, to make things happen. Again, I would like to raise the third reason for this convocation. As individuals and as a community, what is our take on these issues? Make all things new. Make it right. Make it happen. Then we become true gifts to one another. Thank you very much and good afternoon.
Thank you so much, Dr. Laer, for that closing remarks. And now, isang paalala lang sa ating lahat. Meron pa po tayong more than 2 weeks, I think, or less than 2 weeks para bumoto. Okay, please register to vote. Kailangan natin ang mga boto ninyo, 'di ba, para sa susunod na eleksyon. And ladies and gentlemen, the CEU hymn.
Mabuhay ka, mahal naming pamantasan, papuri sa dakilang Centro Escolar. Ika'y dambana ng pag-ibig sa bayan, at anghang nasa riyang matagumpay. Ang diwa ng iyong mga hilig, lumagona sa puso't bibig, sabay-sabay na ipagsisigawan, mabuhay ka dakilang Centro Escolar. Mabuhay ka, mahal naming pamantasan, papuri sa dakilang Centro Escolar. Ika'y dambana ng pag-ibig sa bayan, at hanggang nasa riyang matagumpay. Centro Escolar, Centro Escolar.
Congratulations, everyone. And sana po nagkaroon po tayo ng mas malinaw na perspektibo tungkol sa susunod na halalan at sa impact ng social media sa ating buhay. And now, may I call on the organizers of the Presidential Committee on Culture and the Arts. Ayan. Nandyan po si Dr. Carlito Olaer, ang ating Vice President for Student Affairs at ang ating overall chair. Ayan. Thank you, sir. And then we have, of course, the co-chair and the director. We have Sir June Iran. Ayan, Sir June, Professor Iran, the head of the Conservatory of Music. We have Professor Lester Delgado here. Thank you so much for those wonderful music and songs. And we have the head of the Student Affairs of CEU Makati, Dr. Maria Corazon L. Andoy. Hi, ma'am. And we have Dr. Lani Sakay. Okay, nandito po siya. And other organizers, maraming
President
salamat.
Ju,
And of
Edu,
course,
our president,
maraming salamat.
she's our consultant in the PCC.
Yes, thank you
Really,
very
thank
much.
you.
Congratulations to everyone. Very good show, and also very good participation from our
Yes, ma'am.
students and faculty. Okay, very good questions.
Thank
We
you,
raised a
ma'am.
lot
Thank you,
of
everyone. Maraming salamat. See
thinking,
you next
maraming
year.
pag-iisip ang nag-generate ng ating mga speakers.
Ano daw,
Salamat
President,
kay
dapat may
Prof.
part
Iran at saka kay Prof. Delgado sa mga tugtog. Very good. Very nice. I like the songs, actually. Matagal nang hindi nakiririnig yung Pilipinas kung mahal. Dapat yun na kinakanta eh. Oo, kaya kumakanta ako kanina eh. Nakamute naman ako.
President, may part to dapat.
I like that song very much.
May part to dapat daw, President.
Part 2?
Part 2. Yes.
May yung text ko nga kay Dr. Olaer, I think we are challenged to have this kind of conversation that Professor Jeyeel is saying. And
Yes,
it should be a conversation between intergenerational conversation. Oo. Hindi lang yung mga bata. Oo. And then parang yung matatanda looking down on the bata. No. We come in on equal footing and we discuss things. I think that would be a very good conversation. Maybe we can have something like that in the future, no? Dr. Olaer?
Yes, ma'am.
You and our
Two other campuses, ma'am, will work together
hindi lang
on that.
estudyante sila lang, no?
Yes, ma'am.
Lahat ng generations, no? Oo.
Correct. Opo, intergenerational dapat from boomers, Gen X, millennials, and the Gen Zs.
Oo. Meron nga may comment nga kanina, ano ba yung mag-o-object sana ako pero sabi ko wag na lang. Kasi parang sinasabi niya yung mga bata lang ang nag-iisip. Sabi, excuse me, hindi naman totoo. On the other hand, some old people may also say, yung mga bata, walang isip, hindi ano lang iba lang pinagkakaabalahan, hindi naman totoo din. Di ba, no? Sige, maghanap tayo, Dr. Olaer,
Yes,
ng
ma'am.
magandang topic
Yes,
para pero wag lahat politika. Ang dami
Yes,
naman
ma'am.
natin pwedeng pag-usapan.
Opo,
Although,
opo.
syempre, primary yon. Pero pwede namang iba pa. Congratulations to everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you
Yes,
po.
Very
ma'am.
well
Thank you,
done.
ma'am.
Well done. Thank you. Tsaka
See you
tama
next
lang,
year.
3.5 hours. Pwede lang yun. Hindi masyadong mahal.
Thank you, Edu.
Okay,
Thank you, Sir
bye-bye.
June, Les, Ma'am
Thank you,
Cora,
everyone.
Lani, and Ma'am,
Sino
thank
ang
you so
technical
much.
natin? Sino
Sila,
ang
ma'am.
technical
Si
support?
Sir
Yung
June.
dalawa lang na to? Wala kang ibang katulong?
Wala na po,
Galing
ma'am.
pala. Wow, galing talaga nitong dalawa nating mga kasama. Conductor ng,
Sir
Oo.
Lester.
Hindi
Sige po,
lang-
bye-bye po sa lahat. Salamat po sa mga nanood po.
Yes.
And
Take it
I
away,
hope-
Sir Lester.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.